So we'll go ahead and get started with this hearing. I know we've got, with unanimous consent for those members that are here at the table, I would ask, I know we have a half a dozen or so newly elected legislators. With y'all's unanimous consent, I would ask that they be allowed to sit at the table too, if that's okay. So, Ms. Hurst and Josh and all of you newly elected ones, if you want to sit at the table, come on over here and sit at the table. And also, with unanimous consent, I don't have an issue with them taking part in the question and answer part if they so are inclined to do so. No. Everybody, welcome the gentleman from Grenada. We're glad you decided to come to work today. All right. We are about this. I called this hearing. People had asked me back during the session to do something about this, and of course, with everything happening and going on with election year and all that, we put it off. But this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. It is something that I believe the state is lacking in, and something that I believe we need to take a closer look at. But I do want to say this with the caveat: this is not a hearing on public defenders. This is a hearing on public defense systems. So I don't want it to get off that public defenders are not good lawyers, public defenders are not doing their jobs. In fact, I think it's right the opposite. I think some of our public defenders are some of the best lawyers that we have around the state, some of the best crackerjack trial lawyers that we see, and I do not want it to come off as that way. I want it to come off as more of a look at the system and not the individual public defenders, because I believe that a large part of those public defenders are doing the Lord's work and are not only practicing law, but in some respects are saving people's lives. So I don't want it to come off on that. But with that said, I do want to welcome David Carroll with the Sixth Amendment Foundation, not to be confused with the Second Amendment Foundation, but with the Sixth Amendment Foundation. So David is from Boston, has been working on this issue for over a decade, is that right?
Yes.
So if you would, I would recognize David Carroll. So you're recognized, and take all the time you need, and then we'll ask you some very serious questions.
Thank you, Chairman Bain, for the opportunity to address this body. I am David Carroll, the Executive Director of the Sixth Amendment Center. We're a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting policymakers understand and meet the parameters of the Sixth Amendment constitutional right to counsel. Although we are only a decade old, I have personally been providing technical assistance on this issue for nearly 30 years. I've been to all but one of the 50 states working on this issue, so I've seen a lot of what works and what doesn't work. I founded the Sixth Amendment Center on three basic principles. First, we only go where we're invited. We did not want to write a report, for instance, that no one in state government requested and therefore would go up on a shelf and gather dust. Second, we never get involved in litigation, not in class action lawsuits, not in individual cases, or even filing amicus briefs. Basically, the states trusted us to look under the hood and determine what's going on. We didn't want to break that trust by then turning around and trying to sue the state after we learned of any potential deficiencies. Third, we truly are nonpartisan. Our board represents all ends of the political spectrum. You're welcome to visit 6ac.org to look at them. And we get as much funding from conservative philanthropies as we do from more traditional left-leaning groups. In 2018, we published a report on the right to counsel services in Mississippi. We were asked to do so by the Mississippi Public Defender Task Force, a legislatively created task force. The report did not cost the citizens of Mississippi any state dollars. The report was funded and published by a generous grant of the Department of Justice under President Trump's term. So as not to be accused of cherry picking the very best and the very worst your state had to offer on public defense services, we asked the task force to choose a relative sample of states. They told us where to go, and that's where we went. We conducted court observations, interviewed criminal justice stakeholders. That includes prosecutors, judges, sheriffs, defense providers, anyone that had a perspective on indigent defense. And we, of course, reviewed whatever available data. The 10 counties we went to were Adams, Clark, DeSoto, Forest, George, Harrison, Hines, LaFleur, Lowndes, and Pearl River. Just as basic background to the report, the 6th and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution requires states, not local governments, but states, to provide effective indigent defense services. Now, if a state passes that obligation on to local governments, the state remains obligated to ensure that local governments not only can meet the dictates of the 6th Amendment, but in fact are doing so. And what our report found is that Mississippi state government simply has no capacity to meet that constitutional duty. That is, the right to counsel is provided to approximately 20,000 people every year accused of felonies alone, in front of 457 courts before 605 judges, justices, and magistrates. Now, no one has accurate data on how many misdemeanor defendants are also represented by those people. But without state oversight, legislators are left to pass laws based on incomplete information and speculation. There is simply no oversight of indigent defense in the decentralized way Mississippi has chosen to provide it. That is not to say, and I want to be clear about this, that all indigent defense services in Mississippi are deficient. It's that the state simply doesn't know which are deficient and which are working. Now, Mississippi is out of state on this issue, not with the national perspective, but even with its neighboring states. Whereas Mississippi has more than 450 indigent defense services, Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas have just one, a state-funded, state-administered system that oversees and sets standards for all representation. Tennessee has a small quirk. It has two, one for primary services and one overseeing conflict services. But still, the state funds and administers both sides of the equation in Tennessee. When services are out of sight and out of mind, bad things can and often do happen. For example, at the time of our study, we found that 63 of Mississippi's counties, including Adams, Clark, DeSoto, George, and Lowndes that we personally studied, provided right to counsel services through private attorneys who were paid a flat fee to represent an unlimited number of felony defendants, regardless of how few or how many cases the private attorney was appointed to handle, and regardless of how much or how little time the private attorney spent on the defendant's case. With this flat fee payment scheme, a private attorney has a financial interest to spend as little time as possible on the case, sometimes by not visiting a client, conducting necessary investigations, or avoiding hearings at trial. Again, that's not to say if an attorney has a flat fee contract, he or she is providing deficient representation, but the conflict of interest is there, and the state does not know, as they are required, which attorneys are fulfilling their constitutional obligation and which are not. Now, the other thing we found is that there's a huge gap in representation from the time of arrest to the time of arraignment in felony court in Mississippi. We call it the dead zone, in which attorneys simply are not providing representation Clients sit in jail at taxpayers' expense while memories go cold, eyewitnesses get lost, and the representation becomes that much harder. Now, I know Justice Kitchens is going to speak on that a little bit more, so I'll stop there on that issue. The other one is that indigent defense in most parts of the state are controlled by the judiciary. Again, we are not painting with a bad brush every judge in Mississippi as somehow being corrupt or trying to take away a person's representation. The problem is when judges control who's appointing to the case and what they are paid, public defense attorneys can take into account what they must do to get the next contract or get appointed to the next case. And therefore, they're in direct conflict with their stated ethics to do what's in the stated interest of the client. Again, it doesn't take a judge to say, I want to be out of my courtroom so I can be on the golf course at 4. We're not saying that. But we have seen attorneys take into account, oh, I don't want to get the judge upset by filing motions and slowing it down. It's important that Mississippi gets the right. The Bill of Rights was specifically created to protect individual liberties from the tyranny of government. There is simply no greater tyranny in our country than when a government takes a person's liberty simply because it can by failing to provide the defendant with an effective lawyer. Mississippi can prevent this tyranny by empowering and funding, for example, the Office of State Public Defender or some new entity to collect information about what's going on, to set standards of representation, and potentially to regionalize services. There's many things. What I've learned over my time is that there is no single cookie cutter model that can be pulled off the shelf and implemented in any one state. You need to take into account geographic differences, court culture differences, other differences that arise. But the single overriding factor I want you to take away is that the state has no capacity to know what's going on. And again, over 450 individual defense services that need oversight and administration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll pause there, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Let's touch on that. 450 different avenues of defense. In most states are 1 or 2?
That's correct.
Okay. It seems to me that that's kind of well, would you say that most conservatives, most Republicans believe that a small government is a fundamental part of the platform and the foundation of conservatism?
I do. I've worked with conservatives all across the country, most recently in Idaho and in Michigan. In Michigan, indigent defense reform was led by an avowed Tea Party advocate who stated on the record he believes in as little government as possible, but what government should be doing is protecting individuals against government through protecting the Bill of Rights.
So you would agree that in that same vein that the creation of a uniform public defender system would actually be creating less government?
That's correct. I do think that with a functioning indigent defense services, cases get resolved quicker at lower cost. People are held in jail for less time, again, decreasing the public fisc. And really, it's preventing, and again, here, I don't want to paint all DAs in one stroke either. It's not like they're all lock them up without caring. I've met many, even in Mississippi, that are very, very thoughtful on this issue. But it does mean that they don't have to preserve the record and endless appeals going on trying to resolve these cases when they could be resolved faster and better with a functioning defense service.
Would you also agree that one other thing that Republicans, conservatives hold dear is the Second Amendment? Mm-hmm. And that in Mississippi, every felony and sometimes misdemeanors that people are convicted of, they lose their right to carry a gun?
That's correct. And I've worked this issue most recently in Idaho. The person that ran the bill to create the public defender system there was a gun owner, and she came to the gun shop owner, excuse me. And she came to the issue because she was seeing people's liberty to own and buy a gun taken away because they had a conviction that may have been caused by poor indigent defense representation. They were forced into pleas, not understanding the collateral consequences of that plea, including potentially losing the right to own a gun.
And also, another tenet that this committee has taken on the last 4 years has been trying to get people convicted of felonies the ability to get back into the workforce. And as you know, sometimes people will plead guilty to stuff to get it over with or whatever. But as the case may be, when you have a felony on your record, you would agree with me, it can sometimes be more difficult to have a job.
Absolutely.
And that it is incumbent upon us to try to get people to work and to try to put them as valuable members of society instead of a ward of the state, if you will.
That's correct. And in some of the best public defender offices I've seen across the country, they even see their job as extending past into sentencing and detention, and so that they will help bring those people back into the community by helping find placement for if they have dependency issues or other things. Whole reentry divisions of public defender offices. It's a potential. It's not required under the Constitution, but it's a good idea I've found to help on that very issue.
So looking at Mississippi, one thing that we've always concerned with, myself and the gentleman from Grenada a couple of years ago, we've fought and helped to pass expanding parole eligibility for inmates, and that was in lieu or in hopes to offset some federal liability and federal exposure for Mississippi. Not having a public defender system, a uniform public defender with the oversight that you've talked about, what is our exposure in federal courts that we're looking at, possibly?
Yep. So, as I said in my remarks, we have a strict no litigation policy. We believe in legislation. We'd prefer to do it through. And so one of the great pleasures in my life is I no longer have to try to guess what the federal government's going to do or what the ACLU is going to do or what the Southern Sanity Poverty Center might do. So I'm not saying I have any intimate knowledge that something is coming and something will happen. What I will say is that from studying your state, you do have great exposure to a class action lawsuit on these issues because of your lack of oversight and those places where the system is falling down.
And if that were to happen, the Mississippi State Legislature would pretty much lose our discretion on how to define that system, how to create that system, and what we can do, right?
That's correct. That's why really the real reason I founded the Sixth Amendment Center is that I think it's better when legislatures create these systems themselves. It allows them to take into consideration all the court cultures, all the geographic differences, all the various things that come into play when creating a system. When it's sort of court enforced, you lose that liberty to make those choices, and it ends up, in my opinion, being more of a cookie-cutter model that might not fit perfectly. So it's always better, in my opinion, to take this task on in a legislative forum and try to fix it.
And if you can answer this, and you might not can, how much would you say the state of Mississippi, if it ran a public defender system, how much would the state budget for that? How much would it cost?
So I looked up some numbers this morning. So Mississippi ranks dead last of the 50 states in how much money is spent collectively between local, state, and county government per capita for indigent defense. We have it as 2022, about $9.80 per person being spent. The national average in a country that has indigent defense problems is almost $20 per person. The states that are seen as doing it the best, places like Colorado, they're spending closer to $40 per person on indigent defense. So looking, I think probably the best comparison are those neighboring states I talked about. Tennessee's at about $18 per person, Louisiana $16, Alabama and Arkansas about $13. If Mississippi were to spend $13 per person, move up to an Alabama, Arkansas level, it would be about an additional $23 million, 20 to 23, something in that range. Again, we don't have the data because no one's collecting all the data, particularly on misdemeanor representation. So I wouldn't want to be held to that, but I think that's the number you should be sort of thinking about.
Correct. But in one follow-up on that, and then I'll recognize those members. Right now, most of the public defenders are paid by your board of supervisors and your county officials. This would alleviate them from paying that cost.
That is certainly one of the options. There have been states that have started with a transition. Idaho actually did that. They shared the cost for a while, and then the state took it over. So there's lots of different models we can talk to you about if that's something you would want our technical assistance to do. But yes, it's one of the things across the country leading to more and more states to go to state-funded systems is precisely that, a relief to local government from carrying this burden.
All right. Are there any questions from anybody on the committee? The gentleman from Grenada, Mr. Horan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you coming here today, Mr. Carroll. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Maybe you can enlighten me as to your position or what your exposure has been to other jurisdictions as far as what works and what does not work. What jurisdiction has your research shown seems to work the best, or more famously, between the state's responsibility and the local judge's responsibility to comply with the 6th and 14th Amendment?
So one of the foundations of the Sixth Amendment case law, also embedded in national standards, is the independence of the defense function. It really is the best systems have removed the judiciary from direct oversight from indigent defense in all cases. The role of judges should be to be more calling balls and strikes than to be having the thumb on the scale of one side than the other. Again, it's not that judges are corrupt in this way. It's just baked into the system to cause conflicts of interest. As far as sharing the financial burden between local government and state government, there's all sorts of models out there. One of the most recent ones was in Michigan, where they created a statewide commission that was appointed by the 3 branches of government. The Speaker of the House gets an appointment, President pro tem, the governor, the Chief Justice, and they set standards about what must be met in systems. And if the standard is approved through a regulatory process in their state, then local government creates plans on how best to meet that standard. And so you have local control deciding the issues of how to best put that standard in place. But any money between what the county is currently spending versus what it's going to cost to implement the new standard is paid by the state. And we've seen that model take hold in Utah and Nevada now. And it seems to be a good one to sort of start the process from where you have all local and county government control and spending to one that starts sharing it. So that's just one idea.
Thank you. I'm trying to figure out also some of the unique problems we have in Mississippi is there a large number of the states that have public defenders carrying on the responsibility of defending in youth court as well as felony court in those jurisdictions that you see, and how does that impact the financial responsibilities of the state once they implement that statewide program?
Yeah, more and more states are moving to having their public defense services, certainly defending youth in delinquency charges, but also in abuse and neglect and other things like that. Generally, Michigan's actually the next one to go. They created this system I described for adult representation, and they're realizing it's all the same attorneys providing all the other services, and so it's best to have some oversight of those things. Utah was another one, got out the door, created a statewide commission just for adult criminal representation, and has now expanded to child services too.
Are you familiar with the fact that recently the Supreme Court changed the rule on representation at the beginning? If an attorney like myself makes an entry of appearance on a criminal defendant, that you're required to maintain or stay on that case until there's an order entered relieving you. And kind of give you an example, if I get hired on a case and I get hired, my contract reads, pay me this amount to do a habeas hearing or a bond hearing or a preliminary hearing, and then, it's stepped into different categories. Basically, in my opinion, that rule has eliminated the ability for private counsel to get engaged earlier in cases. Are you familiar with the rule I'm making reference to?
I am, yes.
All right. How will that impact? Do you agree with me that that rule is going to increase the need for some type of oversight over these cases, because it's going to find those individuals? You're throwing more individuals into the indigent defense spectrum by virtue of that particular rule. If the judges and they should follow that rule to say if an attorney gets in day one, you're in for a dime, you're in for $1.
Yeah.
You stay there the whole time. Private counsel like myself are going to be more reluctant to get engaged in those cases that you can get on immediately and do something on, even if they become indigent later on or qualify for indigency later on, or indigent representation. Is that rule in effect in some of these other jurisdictions that you're referencing, like Michigan and other jurisdictions?
Absolutely. Mississippi.
How do they deal with it in those jurisdictions?
Yeah, Mississippi stands alone as the only one that has this problem. In Michigan, for instance, the first...
We're on the top on this. We're
yeah, exactly. So Michigan, for example, the first rule that was promulgated was exactly this, that they have to have a qualified attorney at initial appearance, and that person will continue with that case straight through. It did cost an influx of cash needed immediately because it was a gap. People weren't providing that representation. What I will say is that what I know about your state, there certainly could be more public defender offices throughout the state, but I don't know if the caseload is there to have a public defender office in every county, for instance. I think there's always a need for the private bar to be involved in this, and I do think there's a way to effectively do it where it's not encountering some of the problems you've said. And on this note, I just want to say finally, one of the big things is the court did pass this rule, but there's still no body to make sure that rule is properly implemented. I remember when the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a case called Padilla that basically said it would be ineffective representation if defense attorneys didn't let people know about potential immigration consequences of a guilty plea. And some reporter called me and said, "Isn't this a great day? It's going to change the face of indigent defense in this country." And I said, you know, we haven't properly implemented Gideon yet in our country. And it's the same reason the federal government does not have any oversight of the states on this. And so whether states are meeting current case law or not is sort of happenstance. And that is why it's really important at the state level to control this so that it doesn't become a federally regulated aspect where they're dictating what you have to do. And so I really do hope counties and municipalities understand what the court's saying, because I do think it's the right thing under the Sixth Amendment, and it's also good public policy to start doing it.
We appreciate your time. That's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Rankin, you sure? Any other questions? Gentleman from Union.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. I believe you've studied public defense systems in 49 of the 50 United States. Mm-hmm. And where would you rank, and I think I know this answer based on the amount of money we spend, but where would you rank our defense system in compared with the rest of the?
So it's always hard comparing apples and oranges. So I do want to say on the record, there's states like California that to me represent the best and the worst in our country. They also are county-based systems. If you have funding in a place like San Francisco or Santa Clara in Silicon Valley, you have some of the most innovative indigent defense systems. But if you get out into the rural parts of California, it's as bad as anything that I've seen in this country. So I just wanted to clarify that before I said, I do think Mississippi is the most decentralized of any system, and therefore the potential for the most bad things to happen, and the fact that you fund your services at the lowest rate in the state, to me says that you're definitely in the bottom of indigent defense services.
That's it, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Gentleman from Rankin changed his mind. Go ahead, you're recognized.
Mr. Carroll, thank you for being here. This is kind of maybe a stupid question, but is there any place in Mississippi the district attorneys are elected in circuits? Is there any place where there's a similar for public defenders?
There is. So the state of Florida and the state of Tennessee elect their public defenders on either circuit or district basis. In Nebraska, there's a law that allows counties to do that if the county is over 100,000. I believe there's now 3 elected public defenders in Nebraska. And then the city and county of San Francisco elects their public defender. So the model is out there, and you can certainly look and visit Tennessee as one. What I found is it does cause great differences in the level of services depending on who the elected public defender is. And so you have had people in Florida in particular run tough on crime campaigns to become the public defender. And they're committed to getting cases disposed as quickly as possible, not correctly. I think some of the services in Tennessee are among the best our nation has. Knoxville has really innovative services, but you go to other parts of Tennessee and it's as poor as some of those rural California counties too.
Thank you.
And to me, the level of justice someone gets shouldn't be based on what side of the county line crime is alleged to be committed. There should be one uniform level of justice.
Any further questions from anyone? Gentleman from October Hall, you look perplexed. More so than usual.
That's a very important look for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You may have answered this already. Is there any cost estimates that you, and I realize this is not plugged in yet, but is there any idea of what the cost may be involved in?
So earlier I did say based on what other states are spending or comparative states and everything, we're looking at about $20 to $23 million investment.
All right, any further questions? Mr. Carroll, we appreciate you coming. Your information has been very useful, and we appreciate your work on doing this in Mississippi and other states. So, thank you.
My pleasure.
All right, the next I have is no stranger to our committee. He's testified on numerous things, and that is Andre DeGree. Andre, if you would take your normal place down there at the, and you're recognized when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, can we put him under oath, maybe? You can put him under
I do feel like I'm in the dock many times. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I am Andre Degree, your state public defender. I have been here many times. I haven't had as many people joining me at this microphone, so I really appreciate the work you did putting this hearing together. Mr. Chairman, you alluded at the beginning that we had talked about this hearing and we sort of got sidetracked. It was an election year, but it was also a Hinds County year. And we spent a lot of time last year talking about the issues in the capital city that related to what we're here talking about today. So I understand the need to put us off, but I will let you know that I started in state government in 2001. Now my focus at that point was capital defense, and the counties were being sued for not providing adequate capital defense. Cases were being reversed, and we created the capital defense program that is now part of the state public defender, as well as a capital post-conviction program. There was a task force at that time that recommended creating the state defender. It was 10 years before that was created, and then I took over in that position, leaving capital defense in 2016. At that point, Mr. Carroll was already here beginning his work with the task force. I will say the task force did not meet continuously for 17 years, thankfully. It came and went, but the last 4 years, there was an intense focus. 3 of the members, you'll hear from Judge Harrell, District Attorney Hal Kittrell was on that committee, and at the request of Justice Kitchen, stayed on the committee after his time as president of the Prosecutors Association left. They did a lot of work. And the final report, I think, of the task force that came out in 2018, it was that they worked with the Sixth Amendment Center in getting to their conclusions. There was a lot of hard work that went into that, work by, we had representatives from the county, also defense lawyers. I was not on the task force, but I was in the room with them and heard the raised voices at time. And they came out with what they thought was a good compromise that would get Mississippi to, on the funding issue, a 50-50 county and state funding level. And some of that was based on what you heard this morning from Mr. Carroll about the states that tie in. The county doesn't have to contribute anymore. Because when we talk about that $23 million number of new funds, the counties, we don't know how much they're spending now. When the task force looked at this, they came up with, and simply by calling the counties and asking them how much they were spending, the counties were spending about $17 million. We know that's gone up. It's gone up, and you'll hear from Judge Harrell later, because in some places they have enhanced indigent defense, and so that costs more money because they're not getting money from the state. We know this rule change. I will take the gentleman from Grenada aside and explain to him how he can keep doing these cases early on, because we don't want them all coming into the indigent defense system. But if we get the stubborn judge who won't let him out, we can take care of him submitting bills to him, because there is good case law. You can't take a lawyer's time. And that really was what started capital defense, was the Wilson and Pruitt case, where the Supreme Court said you can't take the lawyer's time, you can't take his stock in trade. So directly related to this rule, there are at least 2 counties that have added part-time public defenders to meet this new issue of And I would say the Supreme Court clarified what was always the rule, but it is, and I've heard this from several judges, and I'll speak to them at the end of the month, which will be a more hostile situation, I think, for me than coming to you. But we know that the counties trying to respond to this are having to add new public defenders. And when I use public defender, I'm just talking about somebody who takes on a case, whether they're working full-time in an office or they're a private lawyer that just takes cases on the side. They're all public defenders to me. So, but when we're talking about reforms and improvements, we're not talking about doing away with the private bar. We always have to have the private bar there. That's one of the things that Judge Harrell and I bumped heads about until he started making these changes. And you just find out, just for conflict purposes, if nothing else, you have to have the private bar actively involved. The best public defender system in the country is in the District of Columbia because the federal government funds it. They have about a 50-50 mix of full-time and then private lawyers doing cases. So you can't start working on that until you have standards in place and are able to collect data. And so I've given you a handout. It has, I can email it to you. It has links to David's report, the Sixth Amendment Center report, and the final report from the task force. So they're going to be covering page 1 and 2, and I think we talked a little bit, the findings of the Sixth Amendment Center, that finding number 4 on the dead zone. We are working towards, under the leadership of the Supreme Court, doing away with that, but that's just going to cost more money. What I'm proposing now as a next step, and I will be clear, this isn't the final step. This isn't, we couldn't do this and even roll it out statewide and say, okay, all our work is done, we're going to have a good system, because under the best scenario, we would go from however many systems we have now to 23, which is a whole lot better than what we have today, but it's not anywhere near the 1 or 2 that would be that recommended by the task force or that would be ideal. And so I want to throw it open to questions, but just say a couple of things quickly. What we were asking for, the back page is HB 840 from last year that you passed, and it just adopts recommendation 1 from the task force report. And because we don't have a commission that would do this, we recommend we'll develop the standards through the public defender system, submit those to the Supreme Court, and through their regular rulemaking authority. The Chief Justice has told me that he's confident that the Rules Committee can handle approving that. The other part was also something you did last year and the Senate joined in, is we are currently doing some of this work that we're proposing. We're doing it in the child welfare system and have been since 2018, where we're helping counties fund representation to parents in child welfare cases. And the first thing that was done before we got involved was there was a task force with judges and lawyers and the Attorney General's office. They developed standards, and so those lawyers operate under standards. We've now got standards for social workers and peer partners in that area. The only place they have to follow the standards is where we're giving them money. And I will be back here for any of you on Appropriations Committee asking for more money on that project too. But that's what, that setting those standards, objective statewide standards, is very important. And then when I say we're doing it now, even in criminal cases, we've done it in death penalty cases for 2 decades. We're doing it in criminal cases in Hinds County, and you'll hear from the Hinds County Public Defender later. But through HB 1020, the public defender in Hinds County got the authority to hire 3 people, and we are funding those 3 people. And I will just say, and I will leave the Hinds County Public Defender to talk about the details. We think this gives them an opportunity to change how they have been practicing and to focus more on those early cases, the early intervention so that people are represented from the time they get arrested all the way through the system, and it's simply not triaging and leaving people sitting in jail for too long. And I talk a little bit in my prepared about the importance of that, and we need to do more. We need to give them support staff like investigators and social workers. If you're going to have a mental health court, if you're going to have a drug court, those clients need to be properly screened and screened early to get into those programs. So I could go on too long for this, so I will appreciate you not gaveling me down yet, and ask for any questions.
Andre, what you talked about this, let's just say hypothetically we have a system in place, 23 districts, whatever you say, and then you said that the private bar was still necessary, the private bar for conflict reasons was still there. What, in these other states, these other places where that's set up, who pays for that private attorney?
I think that's probably a better question for Mr. Carroll, but today the county pays everything. So the question would be how we could set it up, and the task force recommendation was to have a commission, and there would be a conflict group that handled the funding of those positions. But because sort of as we do in the child welfare area, because it's sort of a county up system that we have here, and we're trying to just supplement what they're doing, that those decisions would be made at the county level or at a district or multi-county level as to how many positions you have, and that gets back to the need for data. This body increased the number of assistant DAs last year. Based on the numbers they provided, you shorted them about 20 ADAs. Now, I'm not here crying for them because they're a whole lot closer to where they need to be, but I think that their numbers, when you start with the numbers, we need more ADAs, and we also need more public defenders. And so it is, when you start with the data, then you can start looking at, well, okay, if you're going to put in Hinds County, how many cases are there? And they have good data. They have data from the defense office. They have data from MEC, data from the prosecutor. We knew how many cases there were. We just knew there were too many. And but there's still $250,000 going out to private lawyers for people who get appointed by these various judges. So that money, we didn't help Hinds County with those conflict cases, but when you help somebody in one area, then that frees up money to go somewhere else. And I think that would be, that I think I don't foresee until you pass the 2018 law or something similar, having where it's coming from the state down is not really feasible. So we're talking about sit down with the local authorities as we do in the child welfare cases and say, what is it? You're going to provide this many lawyers, and we've talked about this problem with these flat fee contracts. What we built into our MOU with the judges in the counties that have to adopt these on their board, that there's an agreement that we're going to give you this $24,000 a year or whatever it is. That equates to 25% of a full-time lawyer. So there's going to be a limit in the contract on the number of cases that can be given. So it really would, it still would get you to, they would have the more money that they then can decide how to distribute through the whole system.
I see. Are any questions for Mr. the great gentleman from Grenada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Andre, I want to ask you, the situation that you're talking about, for putting a percentage of funds available for, is that for the conflict you're talking about situation? As far as 25% or 25,000?
Well,
I misunderstood what you were saying about that.
So if you're talking about where, the question was about where the funds are coming from, and that's either
I
county.
guess my question is the plan that y'all want to implement going to cost the counties any more than what they're contributed at this point in time under the plan that you propose?
No. We're talking about enhancing them as we did. It's sort of adapted again to what this body decided to do for Hinds County. And I'm a Hinds County resident, my representatives at the table. We all care about Hinds County, we care about Jackson, but the problems are not just in Jackson. The problems are not just in Hinds County. The indigent defense problem is across the state. So, you look at what is, I don't know of any county. I mean, there probably are some that maybe are underfunding to an extreme, and maybe and some have been sued. There have been lawsuits in Scott County and Choctaw County on issues related to this. But, I think there's nothing in what we're proposing that would require the counties to pay any more than what they're already paying.
So you made a statement earlier about the rule change, but it's your position that hired counsel can basically take legal action against the sitting judge, making them pay them for their services after they've been hired moving forward without doing violence to the rule at all?
Well, I would say the situation would come up like this. The person, whether it's because they just hire you for a limited purpose or they hire you and then run out of money, that people become indigent after the initial appearance all the time. And those people switch from being retained to being appointed. We have a district in this state that has a form order. It happens so frequently. So it's something, I will get back to, and it's not just me saying it. We have law from the Supreme Court that says if a person becomes indigent, you can get expert assistance even though you were retained. And the basis of the Wilson and Pruitt cases are you cannot take from the lawyer. So even if the lawyer gets in, the judge doesn't have to let you out, but if he's not paying you, now, as a recent private counsel told me in a Hinds County case that mistried, he said, I finished the case. I said, it's not finished, it's a mistrial, you got to try it again. He said, I ain't trying it for $65 an hour. That's another issue, but
I guess my point is, it seems that, to me, my experience has been that there's certain circuit judges are taking an approach to the new rule. Other ones are taking a different approach. And my concern is, without something uniform amongst the judges, the danger is that you are going to have more individuals falling in that dead zone than you anticipate. And I've talked to several defense attorneys that do both private and public defender, take appointments and get hired privately, and they're concerned about the fact that the statute that allows a certain, which is woefully low for the public defender per hour basis, 65, and some of them say $40 for office, that's insufficient for them to take the chance that they're going to get engaged in, especially capital cases where someone may be sitting in jail, needs a bond hearing or a habeas hearing, and then get engaged in that, and then be forced course, with trying to make a circuit judge pay them, if, for lack of a better word, it kind of, you understand that may leave a bad taste in certain circuit judges' mouth when you try to do that, right?
I understand that, that
I
there
mean,
are.
you agree that's a challenge that we would have in the bar, local bar, especially in rural areas and areas where that there's limited resources for people to retain counsel. You agree with that?
I agree, and I think that doing something about improving the indigent defense system would take some of that pressure off of what the rule created. I think the rule is absolutely necessary. It did not come from us. It came from a private group, but we supported it.
And I agree that the rule, that we don't need the dead zone at all. There's too many instances where individuals have been left in jail unattended by counsel in between the preliminary hearing stage, bound over to the action of the grand jury until such time as they're indicted, and whether or not they'll get the same appointed counsel at the circuit court level. There's all kind of problems throughout the state not having uniformity, correct?
That's correct.
The second, I'm really concerned about where we are in the youth court system, Andre, and how we're going to provide some of the financial resources to those public defenders that are currently required to appear in youth court as well as circuit court, and the responsibilities they're required to do right now as far as being available spur of the moment for shelter hearings, for all kind of things that youth court judges require, either they be available by Zoom or in person. How is it we're going to meet those challenges with the statewide system?
Well, I think that if you had a statewide system, if you go back to the task force, so I'm getting away from what I'm suggesting on immediate help for criminal cases. If you go back to the task force recommendation, they included youth court and making sure counsel was at the youth court stage as well, and we're talking about the delinquency cases. That's a constitutional right, and we are asking to anywhere where there's a constitutional right to be able to go just as we do in the child welfare cases. I will tell you, be careful looking at youth court because you can't unsee what you see there. I managed until just a few years ago to never dabble in youth court, and when I took over as state defender, we trained both the youth defenders and the parent defenders in delinquency cases and child welfare cases, and the struggles, they are real. Just the caseloads and the number of kids that they are having to represent through the delinquency court, and if we don't get it right there, we are going to see them in adult court in a very short time. So absolutely, youth court needs to be included. I will tell you that, again, back to my appropriations, we are asking for funding to have a program manager for youth defense, just as we do with the child welfare cases, because we seem just to assist with appeals, to do technical assistance for legal research for them, because they don't have time to do that in youth court. And it's really a specialized area. So I know there's a lot of talk about how to improve youth court, and we have some suggestions, but I don't think the answer is we'll just change who the judge is and everything will be good. I think we've got to invest there too, and that is the task force recommendations included bringing in the delinquency cases.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Degree? Andre, always thank you. Thank you for what you provided for this committee and for the guidance that you have provided for me for the last 4 years on many things. Some things I listened, some things I didn't, but I do appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to skip around just a little bit on the agenda. I know some other people had other appointments, but I'm going to go to Judge Prentice Harrell. Judge Harrell, if you will, take your seat, and you're recognized when you are ready. Judge, I would like you to note that the gentleman from Pearl River, Mr. Owen, chickened out and did not decide to come here for you. So be sure to take that out on him when he appears before you next week.
I'm not surprised. Not surprised.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members, for letting me speak. I'll try to be as brief as possible. I do have a lot of subject matters to cover. I do agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that public defenders are some of the better lawyers in my 5 counties. But the problem is they are also so good that if I formulate, of which I have in 2 of my counties, full-time public defenders, they don't want to come. They don't want to be a full-time. They make too much money. They can't afford to take a cut. And I understand that, and I think everybody in this room does. But you do lose some when you go full-time. And I've developed a full-time public defender in 2 of my counties, and 3 of them do not. And I'm going to try to compare, for your consideration, the differences and the cost. And there is a big difference in the cost if you get down to a basic common denominator. But a statewide or full-time public defender is important. And in the 2 counties that I did address, I had to address the Board of Supervisors, and they're interested just like you are. Bottom line for dollars. What does it cost? Now, it does save lives. Just like drug court saves lives. One of the best things in the criminal justice system is the drug court. I have one that's generally around 250 plus people on any given time, and it's very successful for the recidivism rate. It's also extraordinarily successful because of the dollars it saves. I've had 25 drug-free babies born in the last 2 years. Well, now you figure how much that costs when you know it's going to cost $750,000 by the time they're 18, and that's only one. They all have to go to a trade school and or academics or full-time good job. At any one time, I've got over 25 people in a trade school at Pearl River Junior College, which is a great partner with us, or on academics. My last graduation, I had 3 girls graduate with straight A's. They also pay all their fines and fees, and they don't get to sit on the porch. They got to be productive. Now, some of them have to keep mama or kids, and in my opinion, that's productive. But for the most part, they pay taxes. So it is extraordinarily good. I'm so pleased to be a member of the Oversight Committee for the Department of Corrections, and Burl Keynes is doing that. He is attempting to help people's faith, and I think you know what I'm talking about, what he's doing, but he also improved the food, he improved morale, he's on a mission to improve, and one of his basic prongs in that is VOTEC. We need some of our people, in my drug court, we absolutely do it. I had 26 people go to a machine shop school, and 5 or 6 of them were females, and they all, when they finished, they were capable of making $30 an hour, and COLA hired many of them in our local area. These things are important, and a public defender system can be efficient and also save money, as I will try to correlate. It is essential because of the caseload of public defenders have increased and will continue to increase due to the recent amendments of Rule 7.2(c), if you've already heard about today, and I won't waste more time, but that is a rule, and in my rural counties, grand juries don't meet but twice a year generally, and if somebody commits a crime and they're indigent and the grand jury just met, they may wait 6 months in jail, period. Well, 6 months in my Lamar County jail, which I have great credibility with that jailer on giving me accurate dollar amounts, he says it cost him about close to $90 a day. Now, that can run into some serious money, and particularly if you got 5 jails. Now, some of the other ones don't really keep good enough records that I rely or put a lot of credibility on them. But a public defender system in my 2 counties that do, they're required to see as soon as they get to jail if they're arrested. And fortunately, many of them will plea on information. They can put them in a drug court, or they can plea out on a plea deal with the district attorney's office, and that saves money. But a guy that's hired, he may or may not. So it can be good, and I'll assure you that we do require our public defenders to see the people on a regular basis in jail. And they give me, and they show me that they've done that. It's credit to help the credibility. Prior to the amendment to this rule, and this rule, indigent defendants were only represented at the preliminary hearing, had no further representation until they were indicted, of which I've already said that might take 6 months, depending on the type of crime. And I will say that I also want to lobby you for the state crime lab. Many times I've got many cases, and we do jail reviews. Every time I go into a term, I do a jail review. And I go through every one by one. How long have you been in jail? If it's been over 90 days, we ask why, and we expect to get good responses. And we do get good responses. But the chief culprit is we hadn't had the crime lab. We can't indict them. We've already had one grand jury since they were put in. Now we got to wait 6 months to another grand jury because the crime lab can't get to it. We got many particular drug cases. They just don't have the manpower, I suppose, and they say they need more funding. But that is a major stoppage in the flow for the criminal justice system. The crime lab doesn't get out. Now, I'm not pointing fingers, blaming. They may have good reasons. I don't know. But I do know it's taken entirely too much time. And that is something that ought to be looked at. But I do know that indigent defendants cannot often afford to bail. We do have our share of indigency in our state. Demographics have changed dramatically, and you know that some of our central state cities or small cities have dwindled pretty badly. I've got 2 counties that have cities in them that in one nice little town, it's not a city, a very nice little town. It used to have brick streets, very picturesque, pretty little place. 38 storefronts are vacant in that little small downtown. 38, I counted. And the other small county that's one of our oldest cities in the state, it's a pretty little town, but it's suffering from when things change in demographics, and they do. And some of these counties are loaded up with indigent people, and unfortunately, these are the 3 counties that cannot afford a public defender system, and I'll talk about that in a second. They often can go a long time in the jail. A full-time public system has proven in my counties to reduce the lengthy and unnecessary incarceration merely because they get to them quicker. My district, the 15th Circuit District, is composed of Jefferson Davis, Lamar, Marion, Lawrence, and Pearl River. We're very large geographic. We probably have around a little over 200,000 in all, but it's a long way from New Hebron as the crow flies all the way down to the Louisiana line. And it's a big geographic. And the difference in the economics of the counties is dramatic. My prosperous counties that have affluence and they've really grown, Pearl River County used to be a very small, but we all know what Katrina did, and it loaded that county up. The Stennis Space Center has really been a boom for that county. Forest General Hospital just built a multi-million-dollar hospital down there, bought out an old Crosby Hospital, had been there for years and was deteriorating. So Picayune is really bustling. It's growing, Pearl River County, so it's prosperous. To that end, I went to that Board of Supervisors, and they funded a full-time office. And I'm so proud of that. But I do want to speak to you, what you said a while ago in your opening comments, Mr. Chairman, about the growth of government, or the growth, is it going to prohibit, is it going to sustain itself and not grow too much? Well, truth is, when I first started the Pearl River and the Lamar full-time, and both of my supervisors, after I explained it to them, the value, they said, okay. But now I will also tell you that 6 months after I did it, I went back to them and showed them the actual figures, and they were elated. But when I did form the full-time committee in Pearl River, less than 6 months they came to me and said, we need a secretary. And they did need a secretary or office, somebody to help. Well, that's another addition. I got it for them through the board. Well, 6 months later, and I'm 6 months, just a period of time subsequent to that, they came to me and said, it's just not fair. The district attorney's office has got a PI, the private investigator, full-time, maybe more than one, maybe several. We need same footing. We do an investigator to help us investigate. And I don't disagree with that. It does grow, is my point. Now, it's still the best thing going as far as where we've been. And I'll get to that in a minute too. But it will grow some. Some of these offices, they got to have clerical help. They got to have an investigator, or they would say they do. And I think they're probably correct. Nonetheless, get back to my outline. I brought an outline so I wouldn't chase rabbits, as I can do. A full-time public defender in my 5 counties, 2 of the 3 have full-time and the others do not. They do save money, and I'll show you in a minute. The ones I'm composed of, by the way, in garnering the data that I needed, I had to go to many of my Board of Supervisors, their comptroller, or sometimes just a clerical girl that's keeping or excuse me for saying that, person that's keeping all the data. 2 of them, when I told them what I was doing, gathering, they said, what are you getting all this information for? 2 of them, when I said to give you some help to get from the state for the dollars that you're expending, and I'll tell you what each county spends in a second. You know what they said? 2 of them said, hallelujah. And the other one says, that'll be a great blessing. Because unfortunately, these 3 counties are poor. Their tax base has left them. A lot of their affluent citizens have left them. They've diminished rather than enhanced. Now, Pearl River and Lamar hadn't. I personally live in Lamar, and y'all will know how Western Hattiesburg has grown out 98 into Lamar County. Oak Grove School, when my daughter went there, was a poor little 1-horse school. Now it's one of the biggest in the state. Who'd have thought it? But demographics do change, and with that, some of our states are terribly poor. And 3 of my counties, the demographics have been negative. They're positive in Pearl River and Lamar, and it's been good, but that's the 2 counties I've been able to get after I showed them the advantages, and I think they will tell you it is. But in addition to reducing the amount of time a defendant remains incarcerated full-time, the full-time also increases the number of dispositions, and it does, I can show you that, unless we are dealing with a violent crime, a sex crime, or a drug trafficking charge, and those are difficult. Sure. And many of the drugs, I had a case this week where it was aggravated trafficking. That's a lot of drugs. Takes a lot of time for them to bring it to me. It takes a lot of time to investigate. It takes the public defenders. And it's back to that, it took over a year, and well over a year, to get the information from the crime lab so that we could proceed.
Judge, if I may, what do you, in the counties that have the full-time public defender, you alluded that they get the defendant at the time of arrest is when they become the client?
Yes, sir.
Now, in the ones that do not, your other counties, when do they get their client?
Generally, they get them after indictment.
Okay, so in that dead zone area there in those counties, what happens with that defense? Who's standing in the gap with them?
Well, I always do really try to appoint counsel to my people, but I don't really get the chance to even get them before indictment. You know, if they're arrested, they're not under my jurisdiction. I really get them unless they plea on information. So they may languish in jail. But hang on, I'll get back to that. I get sidetracked, I will be in trouble. Medical attention is another major matter. It costs approximately $80 to $90 to house a county, to house a person in jail, at least from my information, from my jail, who I have credibility with. But Lamar County Jail medical expenditures last year came to $680,800. That's a lot of money. That they have to pay that. That's just medical. And unfortunately, many people that have been indigent don't take good care of themselves, and they may have diabetes, they may have heart troubles, they may have a lot of issues. And the county's got to pay them when they're locked up. So it is a issue. But I want to get to my real thing. I want to tell you that my part-time offices is Jefferson, Davis, Lawrence, Marion. These three counties have 47,000 people according to the last census, give or take. And what I'm fixing to do is get to a common denominator. In my past world, and many of you are familiar with square footage of value of your house, you know that how much a house costs in a particular area, the square footage value, or the front footage of a property, or if it's a small enough, the square is a common denominator to get you to try to find out something. So I went to my different counties, and in the public defender budget in Jefferson, Davis, Lawrence, and Marion last year expended roughly $475,000. If I took the number of population in that census, that was 47,800, and they spent 473, and I divided them, I would get $9.90 that each citizen in that county would have been allocated to pay for the public defender system, if I made that clear. To my estimation, that is a basic common denominator of cost. Well, Lamar County and Pearl River County have 120,000. Almost 3 times, 2.5 to 3 times more people, because they're high growth. And in that high growth, I might also add, it's more affluent. I get the North Side Sun, and this is just a aside, but I've been noticing in the last few weeks, and I live in Mississippi and Hattiesburg, but I really like to get Jackson News, and I have liked that paper. And he has spent a great deal of time on his front page paper of giving demographics of people who live in different zip codes in and around Jackson. I found it terribly interesting. You know, how many college graduates in this zip code versus another? How much money do they average make? And that sort of thing. Well, the demographics in my counties, I'll assure you, are much different in their income, job availability, etc. Well, in Lamar County and Pearl River County, with 120,000 plus people, give or take that, according to the last census, they expenditures on full-time, 808,000. Well, that's not quite double, but close to double what 3 counties are paying with a lot less people who are a lot poorer. But how much money, because of their population, if I divide their population into the budget? $1.50. $1.50 opposed to $9.90, which is similar to me. Most of y'all have been in situations in your life when you saw a real good opportunity, and it would have made your life more pleasant, made you a little money, whatever the deal was, but you didn't have the money to front it. But if you would have had the money to front it, it'd have been a good deal. Well, Pearl River and Lamar did have the money to front it. And their average cost per capita for each person, $1.50. A little cheaper, isn't it? If this state can, they'll get a good deal for their money.
How has, let me break in just a second. I'm going to try to move us along just a little bit. But what about your law enforcement in the different counties? The ones that have a full-time and the ones that don't. Have you seen any remarks or any attitude different between your law enforcement agencies? And you may not. I'm just curious as to the ones that have full-time. Do those law enforcement agencies see it as a good thing, a bad thing, versus those that don't?
I have no pushback from law enforcement on full-time public defenders. I really hadn't. Now, they didn't tell me because they know I was for it a lot, but I have had no pushback from law enforcement or otherwise saying, as a matter of fact, the district attorney's office, and he's here today, Mr. Kittrell, I think he applauds what the full-time doing because they have ability to talk to them on a more regular basis, or they can come to grips easier and closer. Some of the part-timers, and I do have some excellent part-timers, but if they're out on a $1 million deal or a big high dollar, they're getting paid a big money by a good client, who they going to give first attention to.
Sure.
Well, that's that, but I have had no pushback from the counties that have it. And I do have some good public defenders in my part-time, excellent public defenders in my 3 rural counties. Now, if I do go, I'd like to consolidate the whole counties, the whole 5, and have one PD, and then he be responsible for the others, how he coordinates it. And I think that would be very efficient in a lot of different ways. I had 2 capital murder trials that were pretty bad out of Picayune recently, and because of conflicts, I had to change a venue. In their case, it wasn't too bad. To make a long story short, in a capital murder, and you alluded, Mr. Horan, I think, mentioned a while ago about how much do you pay. I know the statute, and I know how it reads, but in our counties, I normally pay $90 an hour, period, which is over everything most people do, and it's over the statute. I've never had anybody complain. Now, on capital cases, I jumped it to 100, and I paid 100. Well, the cost for a lengthy, well-publicized, difficult trial that had to have a change of venue, and the lawyers, in my opinion, did not overcharge at $100 an hour, which is unheard of in most places for capital, and it was a serious matter, got a high profile, a lot of publicity, had made national news. It was a big deal. 2 lawyers, it was in excess of $80,000, and the counties had to pay it. Now, I cut them, but I didn't cut them that much.
Right. One thing that I don't think that no one has talked about, and in my private practice, I see an issue with this on a daily basis. For your information, Judge, I am the public defender for Tishomingo County.
Well, then you understand.
And at that, I do not get my client until indictment. But here's the great problem that I see in my district, and that's the 1st Judicial District up in Northeast Mississippi, is the qualification of indigent clients. There is I cannot tell you how many that I have had who drive a better car than I do, there is no oversight on who is being qualified as an indigent. Most of them just show up and say, I don't make any money, don't have anything. So yes, sir. So my question to you is, how do you do that? And is that a problem? I think it's a problem statewide. But
I require, and I absolutely do it, a affidavit, and I tell them at the docket calls when they're all before me, the whole courtroom's full. If you're poor, you have a constitutional right to have a lawyer represent you, and you will get one. But the taxpayer's got to pay for it, and that's pretty serious. If you've got a pickup, and it's paid for, maybe you need to sell it. And I do say those things. They fill out an affidavit. All the clerks email those affidavits to me at arraignment, and they send them to me, and I look at them. And it's under oath. If they're truly indigent, in my opinion, if they don't have a job and they live with their mama, they are living in a trailer and it's got a big debt on it. Generally, I look at the guidelines for what is an indigent in Mississippi. Somewhere around 20,000. Now, that sounds awful high to me, because many of us, years ago, we didn't make over 20,000. But that's about it in a lot of our areas. Well, I don't approve a lawyer until I read it. I think that's part of my responsibilities, is to look at that affidavit that they're required to fill under oath. They've been instructed that the judge will rule this, don't you lie. And if they do lie, they know, and I tell them at docket call, if you lie to me, you're under perjury or contempt, one of the 2.
do you do that for the full-time public defenders system as well? Do they fill out the affidavit on that?
Yes, sir, they do for them, but I'm not as strict as me looking at it. It's only mostly in the 3 rural counties that do not have it, I do that. But in the other counties, I'm not near about as strict. They look at it.
Your Honor, I appreciate your testimony. Are there any questions for, yes, gentleman from Jefferson, my good friend?
Thank you, Chairman. Judge, I do public defender work in rural counties, Jefferson, Claiborne, and Wilkerson, and Adams. I think you may have touched on it. You said something about $90 an hour. I've tried murder cases plenty of times, and I'm only able to get paid $1,000. Okay.
I don't think that's right.
Okay,
I just don't think that's right.
I wanted to know your opinion on that. And you said you allow your attorneys to bill. Is that for only murder cases or capital offenses, or is that for every case, like any case?
If it's a serious case, then I require billing or itemized billing that I look at.
Okay.
I require that.
Okay.
And it takes some time. Sometimes I don't want to, but I think that's part of my responsibilities too.
Okay.
I look at it, and if I do see that they spent too much travel time or spent too much time sitting in the courthouse, that they weren't doing anything, I might cut it.
One more question, Judge. And one other problem, and I agree with Chairman about the indigency. Trying to determine whether they are not indigent or not. But another issue that I have with indigent is my clients will not contact me until they know it's trial time, maybe a day or two before trial. And the judges make it like it's our fault. You know what I mean? Like, we're supposed. I've been made by a judge to go to a client's house and pick him up and bring him to trial, and we won the trial. But he had not contacted me or anything.
Sir, if I could respond to that.
Okay.
The method that we use, and I think Mr. Kittrell will know that I do this. There is a standing rule, and I put it in some of my orders, but I always say it at the docket call or when they come before me, or when I appoint them, if they're before me. I always say, and it's written somewheres, if you do not keep up with your lawyer and you change telephones and you don't keep him apprised of your new number, or you move and you don't keep up with him and you don't call him once or twice or whatever he dictates to you that you must, that is a violation of your bond.
Right. Okay.
And I put that as a violation of the bond. And it has saved, and the defense lawyers have thanked me for that.
Okay.
So that's a major way that we handle that.
Gentlemen,
I think it's effective.
I'm sorry, Judge. I have one more question. Go ahead if you need to finish, or I was going to recognize the gentleman from DeSoto, Mr. Hall.
Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the invitation. Thank you, Judge, for the testimony. Hey, I wanted to get back to the gap that you brought up, where defendants aren't having an attorney appointed until after indictment. You talked about a defendant sending up their information or sending up their plea on info. What happens if a defendant represents an attorney before they enter that plea that's sent up on info? Do they get one?
I don't understand your question. I'm sorry. Your voice trailed off. So say again.
For a defendant that is, has not been appointed an attorney yet because they haven't been indicted, but they want to send up their plea on info. If they request an attorney, do they get an attorney?
Yes, sir. In my court, they would get a court. If I know if they say, I want to plea on that information, or I want to plea, yes, sir, I'll make sure they get an attorney real quick.
And then, I think you alluded to this in your testimony, when you talked about the grand jury, they don't convene
Twice a year. Now, this new rule, the Supreme Court is going to eliminate that. They still got, when they're charged, they need a lawyer. So that'll help that, and it already has.
Gentleman from Grenada, do you have a question? No. I thought you did. Okay.
Mr. Horan didn't have a question? I'm surprised.
Any other questions from the committee? I don't see any. Judge, thank you for your time. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And I appreciate what you are doing down there.
I don't want to be corny, and I don't want to be anything at all. But I read from our instruction book on a regular basis this morning. I normally try to. And it just hit me this morning. I opened up, and I'm going to say this. I really considered whether I should or shouldn't, but I'm going to. Psalms 41:1 read this morning when I opened it up. Blessed is the man who considers the poor.
Amen.
Now, we could substitute man for our society or our state. but that was sort of hit me this morning. Now, I don't want a welfare state any more than anybody else does, but we do have indigent people that need help. And these two affluent counties that did front it, they're able to, and they get a good deal for it. And if Mississippi does the same, in my opinion, you'll get a good deal for it.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
All right, moving along, I'm going to, again, move around, but I'm going to call Mr. John Coletti to testify. Mr. Coletti, for those of you who are interested, and for those of you who aren't, I'm still going to say, was my very first boss that I had in practicing law. He taught me how to do a lot of stuff, and so all of you who don't like the way I do stuff, you can blame Mr. Coletti, I guess, on some things. But John is a dear friend, and the reason he is here is he does a ton of federal defense. And Mr. Coletti, if you would tell us how you were a part of the CGA panel and how that kind of transitioned into the federal public defender system as throughout your practice. But in any way, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you also for inviting me. It is quite an honor. I think I've been here in Mississippi practicing 40 years. Last time I was here, I believe we tried a case in the old Supreme Court chamber. But yeah, as Chairman Bain tells you, years ago when I came here, I quit high school, went to law school late because I said, these lawyers are not really that smart. I think I can do that. And worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office clerking. It was a free job. I read for Sean Barrett. She is a blind, or she's retired now, a blind AUSA. And I was so inspired, I would go to Sterling Towers, if you all know where that's at, and I would read the cases, and she'd type them out on Braille. You talk about an incentive for a little short guy from Ohio to study. It was great incentive. In any event, I worked there part-time. That was a free job, and I worked with Sam Wilkins. Those of you, I know Judge Kitchen, Sam was one of the leading criminal lawyers in the state. Absolute character, go in the courtroom with one piece of paper and know everything. It amazed me. I need 40 books and a tray of cases. I got on then, after I left with Sam, Judge Countess appointed me to cases, and I was basically the federal public defender, lack of a term. We didn't have an office. In fact, about a year later, Dennis Joyner got appointed and ran that office. But I was getting federal appointments, and I got a lot of state appointments, Judge Coleman and whatnot. The pay was terrible, but the experience was great. But what I hope that this body understands is the poorest people need the best attorneys, and they can't afford them. I mean, we're the last line of defense. People get indicted who didn't do it. I had one last year in this county. Guy got indicted for murder, said we got it on videotape. He had some money. I had the tape in hand. The DA dismissed it a month later. You know how scary that is? Because this system moves fast. What I also want you to ask you to do is, I agree with Andre. We need a unified public defender system. We need a public defender system, and hopefully Gail's going to address this, that'll put them on parity with the prosecutors. They have seminars, they got bar convention stuff, they've got investigators, they got witness coordinators, they got coordinators for the coordinators. And you got in the public defender's office, you got a guy maybe a year out of law school. I brought Judge Wooten's docket for next week. 25 cases set for trial. 18 of them public defenders. Several of them, Andrew Williams got them back to back. Okay? So your son or daughter is charged with murder. You don't have any money. Public defender got appointed. He's got a murder trial on Monday. He's got one on Thursday. Is that what the Constitution guaranteed us? Is that fair? You all talk about $65 an hour, and Judge Harrell had a murder case, paid $80,000. $200,000-$300,000 for a murder case. You got to have an expert. I got to have a witness. I got to have an interpreter in a lot of cases. I mean, you know, I know it's funny, but my goodness, what's your freedom worth? You know, we're lucky. We've got jobs, but people mess up. And I would just beg you to get a unified system. Along with that comes, like the other expert said, was you can do about your standards and what later, but we've got to at least provide adequate representation for the people who need it the most. I mean, it's more of a plea on my part. I mean, I can answer any questions about what I see in the system. The federal government obviously has more money. They've now are starting to do layers where they've got their own investigator. But, you know, an investigator, if I need to go interview a witness, I got to hire somebody to do that. What does the DA do? He's got 14 different cops he can call.
Right.
James Tucker just passed away, one of my best friends, chief of the criminal division, worked with Mike. When he first got out, he had a friend who got locked up in Madison. He says, how do I go to the jail? I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't know how you do it. I said, get in the car. I said, you're so used to calling the FBI, say, bring that guy down to my office. This is the real world, James. And I said, so, you know, yeah, we're in the ditch. I mean, I'm on the higher end of the ditch now, but after 40 years, it's come a long way. But again, when you're out there representing this guy and he tells you he didn't do it, you say, okay, you got to shut down everything else. You got to go interview witnesses. You got to work at night. At my old age, I was at the jail at 7 o'clock the other night. That's a rarity. Thank God he had a lot of money, but in any event, he had as the important point. We relieved him of some of that. But I again encourage you, it is a serious matter. And a lot of folks don't even know the Constitution applies. They don't know anything about a Fourth Amendment unless you or your kids are in trouble. Then all of a sudden, this war on crime becomes, I want my constitutional rights. It's sad, but like I said, the fact that the judge who appoints you can, for these young lawyers that are coming out, and again, the expert mentioned that, you can't make him mad. Because you're not going to get no more court appointments. I've heard him tell me, we're not going to appoint him no more. Why is that? Well, he came in here with some silly motion, a motion to suppress. Can you believe that, Coletti? Oh, you mean like they stopped him because he was Hispanic or black coming through Mississippi and the LPR hit and he had a Texas tag? You mean something stupid like that? Exactly. Isn't that silly? Yeah, it's also called the Fourth Amendment. Yeah. So that's what we're dealing with. I hope I can answer any questions with limited knowledge I have.
Tell me, when you moved from basically being a public defender and at the federal level, and then they adopted the federal public defender office, what did that do to the docket, if you know, to the docket of the federal at the federal bench?
Well, I think it lessened it. I mean, I still serve on the CJA panel. In fact, my trial last week was on a PPP loan. It was court appointed. It greatly reduced it. You know, over 90% of these cases are going to be pleas. But in order to get there, I think you need to ensure that the state can prove what they have and that it is in the best interest of your client because of all the collateral consequences. But, you know, you get that 10% that says, Mr. Coletti, I didn't do it. I said, man, but look, he said, I'm telling you I didn't do it. And, you know, you argue with them and you say, okay, I mean, you signed this note here, here's the plea bargain, I'm not taking it, we'll go. So I think a unified federal public defender system, it turned chaos into a little more uniformity, because at that point, they would just go down the list. They would call Sam, they would call me, they'd call Sabek, they'd just go down your list and appoint you. And the money's the money, but I mean, I think there's somewhat of a trade-off because you're staying in court, and if you want to be a trial lawyer, the only place you get that is in the courtroom.
This committee has taken the view the last 4 years of really putting the ones in jail that need to be in jail, making sure that we're able to do that and make sure the laws are provided to do that, and getting the ones that need help, the help that they need. And one way is to do that, I think, is to, what you're saying is providing them defense from the forefront. And as quickly as possible, and seeing which ones need to go to jail and which ones you can help. Obviously, whatever ethical concerns you have as a lawyer, making sure those are upheld. But be that as it may, That's the whole idea I have with the public defender system is it bogs down things the way we're doing it now. You have victims that aren't being, victims' families who aren't getting the so-called justice that they need. You have other people who are out there running around that may need to go to jail, but they can't get to court, or they're not getting to court. As a private defense attorney who has done it both ways, would you agree that a public defender system would be more efficient for our courts around the state?
Absolutely. I think you could specialize. You could have like they do in the federal system. You've got federal public defenders that do nothing but magistrate work. That's your initial appearance and detention. Why couldn't you do that with the public defender? You got your younger people or whatever, less experienced, and have them do the preliminary. This 60, 90, 120 days in jail, we get a call once a week. My son's up in wherever county. He's been in jail 8 months, hadn't seen anybody. I said, really? And I think the Supreme Court has tried to address that. But yeah, I think when you get some uniformity, you could specialize and have people work on that basis. Again, it's a terrible thing to sit there and not having seen a lawyer. Each county does it differently. Judge Emfinger, when he was in Rankin, I call it the Emfinger rule, we got to go to court 5 times to tell them, hello, we're here. And that is the Emfinger rule. Whatever. But what it was the first day is a status conference. I said, what is that? Well, you got to be here. What do I do? You just tell them you're here. Really? I mean, I got to do that? You know, would I charge an hour? I got to charge my client 4 times to come up there and say, yeah, hey, Judge, are you? I think what it was might have been, and I think Judge Harrell touched on it, and maybe one of the representatives, that the person who was appointed had not met their client, or the client hadn't showed back up. So I think Judge in his infinite wisdom said, okay, we're going to have a status conference. And many times he says, oh, Mr. Rader, I want you to be Mr. Jones. This is your client. Can you all get together? And you know, the public attorneys are saying like, wait a minute. I mean, the private lawyers. But again, whatever y'all can do, I know funding's always an issue, but I'm telling you, it will save money in the long run. You'll save your jail or warehousing people. Get them in the system. Get them tended to, the ones that need it. And I'm all for the rehab, all for pretrial, all for whatever educational programs we need to get. You're seeing a lot of money being spent. Judge Sterrett was big on it, on this reentry stuff. What do we do with these folks when you get them out of prison so that we can make them employable? The last thing anybody wants is recidivism, especially in that system. So I would encourage the legislature to try to carve out something. I saw that bill you had, HB, whatever one you passed. I mean, you got $54 million for the Gulf Coast restoration. That's great. That's pretty. But what about these people sitting in prison? How do we pay that back? I mean, if I had to stay overnight, I'd be upset, let alone 9 months, and then they say, oops, you know, you're the wrong person. You're starting to see some of it on the DNA, but let's at least try to serve the most needy in the state of Mississippi, and that's our indigent people who get accused of a crime.
Any other questions for Mr. Coletti? Anybody?
Thank you all for Nick.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you coming by. Always good to see you. All right, let's move on to one of the legendary lawyers in Mississippi history, Justice Jim Kitchens. Justice Kitchens, if you would, please take the mic, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished members of the committee, sir, your adjective legendary had me looking around to see who you were talking about. I think that's a synonym for old. But I do thank you, sir, and members of the committee for having this hearing on this vitally important subject. I want to give you a little context concerning the task at hand here. And I will tell you that when I started practicing law back at the end of the last ice age, which was about 1967 for me, Gideon versus Wainwright, which is now a 60-year-old U.S. Supreme Court case requiring the appointment of counsel for indigent defendants in all kinds of felony cases, was a new case. It was a pretty new thing. So I got out of law school, and the old judges were trying to come to grips with this requirement. Previously, the only people that ever got any publicly funded representation were people charged with capital crimes. But now it was extended to the whole breadth of felonies. And so they would look around the courtroom for young lawyers to appoint. It happened that the first two trials I ever had were in capital cases, because every murder case was a capital case then. You always had the possibility of a death sentence in every murder case, every armed robbery case, every kidnapping case, and we didn't have many treason cases, but it applied to those too. So I got appointed on two murder cases and tried them to verdict when I was 24 years old. For each of those cases, Copiah County paid me $50. And had I lost, I would have been grossly overpaid, but thank God I was able to prevail in both of those cases, just because I didn't have anything else to do but work on those cases, and I knew more about the facts than the DA did when we got to the courtroom. So that was a long time ago. We have transitioned a lot, but so have the district attorneys. I will tell you that when I had been out 4 years, in 1971, I miraculously was elected district attorney for Copiah, Lincoln, Pike, and Walthall counties, the old 14th district, which has now been split up. So I live in Copiah County. Now I live in the 22nd district, Copiah, Jefferson, and Claiborne. But when I was beginning my career, all the district attorneys in the state were part-time. They all had a private law practice. The legislature had decreed by statute that in 1968, beginning with that term, that elected district attorneys could decide themselves whether they would be full-time or part-time. So this is the first step in the transition to full-time district attorneys. To my knowledge, there was one in the state during that term. There were 20 circuit court districts in, Rankin and Madison being the newest one. And so there was one DA in the state, and his name was Neil Biggers. Some of y'all may have heard of Neil Biggers, who has had a distinguished career, most recently on the federal bench. But Neil Biggers was district attorney up in the 1st district, and he elected to be full-time. So instead of the $10,000 a year that part-time DAs got paid, Neil got paid $20,000 a year. That's what the starting salary was for a long time, even during the inflationary days. People think we got inflation now. They should have lived in the 70s when my children were being born. We couldn't afford, when I was DA, we couldn't afford to do much recreationally but have children. So we started out with one. We started out with one and ended up with 5. State group insurance was pretty good. So I got elected DA, and about half of us in the state during that term were part-time, the others full-time. I ran on a platform that I would be a full-time district attorney. And I prevailed over 2 older, much much more experienced and undoubtedly more capable lawyers than I, because they both wanted to be part-time and retain their law practice. And Paul Pittman down at Tylertown, who many of you may remember, editor of the paper down there, came up with a theme for my campaign, and was, can a man serve two masters? You know, a scriptural theme doesn't hurt anything in Mississippi, so that theme helped me get elected DA. And I had no assistant, I had no investigator, no secretary. I was responsible for all the felony prosecutions, of course, in the circuit court. Had one county with a county prosecutor. Pike County had a county court and a county prosecutor. In all those other counties, Copiah, for instance, we had 10 justices of the peace. If anybody represented the state at a preliminary hearing, the district attorney, I had to do it. I could not have done all this if I hadn't been very young and energetic at that time. So, same thing in Lincoln County. Lincoln and Copiah were the two largest counties in the state without a county prosecutor. Was discretionary with the supervisors. And the last thing the supervisors wanted back in those days was more prosecutors. So, I'll leave you to your own conclusions, but this was before Operation Pretense, by the way. So if there was a preliminary hearing to be had down at Dexter in Walthall County, right on the Louisiana line, I went down there and did it. I did most of my JP work on Saturdays. And I had all of the child support cases for the welfare department, now DHS, in the 3 counties without a county prosecuting attorney. We had so many of them in our Chancery district there in the Judge Mike Carr's district, Lincoln and Copiah County. He set aside a day in every term of court for nothing but paternity cases. And he called it Father's Day. So I had all of the Uniform Reciprocal Enforcement Act child support cases from all over the country. I alone had these things, and I'm not complaining because it did me a lot of good. I mean, it made a better lawyer out of me, but I was a busy young man back in those days. Finally, William Guy, Bill Guy from Macomb, who served in both houses of the legislature at different times, was able to get me a part-time assistant district attorney. And that transitioned a few years later into one full-time district attorney. I served 9 years. I never had but one assistant. And so, you know the situation now with the district attorney's offices, and they should be well-staffed. They should be well-funded. By the way, the funding was a really problematic thing because the counties were responsible for funding the expenses of the DA's office. In October of '72, a statute went into effect that provided that if one were a full-time district attorney, he got $1,000 a month from the whole district, from the boards of supervisors. The DA had to apportion to each county a number based on his activity, workload in that particular county. And it was a few $100s for each county. I don't know how to say this any other way, but I will tell you, I had one hell of a time getting that money out of those counties. They were habitually late. Some never paid any of it for long periods of time, and then they pay a little of it. It was a nightmare. I and others in the Mississippi Prosecutors Association led the charge on begging the legislature to provide state funding for this state office. After all, the district attorney is a constitutional office, just like attorney general and governor. So the legislature stepped up and did fund on a statewide basis all of the DA's offices, and we didn't have to beg the counties anymore. This was difficult for the counties because suddenly, and by the way, this is the same time at which the sheriffs became full-time, no longer fee officers, and so the counties were having to fund the sheriff's offices in a way that they never had before. And here you got district attorneys with their hands out, these full-time DAs, because what they were accustomed to in county government was an attorney running for DA who had a good law practice and had an office and had a staff and had typewriters, and there weren't any copying machines then. Those came along about that time. We had carbon paper, but no type. All the indictments, by the way, I used to type them by hand at night on a manual typewriter using carbon paper to make the required number of copies. So, I mean, that's not what you're here to learn about, but I want you to think about the difference from that and a DA's office today. So, full-time DAs came about transitionally about the same time that court-appointed lawyers in criminal cases came about. And so look at the two adversaries in the adversarial system that we treasure in America in our courts. You've got the prosecution on the one side and the defense on the other side. A few defendants are able to hire lawyers. I did a lot of criminal defense work, did well at it, and loved it after I got out of the DA's office and to a lesser extent before. But in Mississippi, the poorest state in the United States, we have a disproportionate number of people who cannot afford counsel. So, on the one hand, we have public prosecutions. The Constitution says that all prosecutions shall be in the name and by the authority of the state. The U.S. Supreme Court tells us in Gideon that all defense for indigent people shall be done by whom? By the counties? No, by the state. So the states can pass that duty along to the counties, but the state is still the responsible party. The state is required to see, as Mr. Carroll said, the state is required to see that those counties that fund the public defense in their counties, that they are able to do so adequately. Bottom line is the counties cannot do it alone. The counties must have some help. Judge Harrell demonstrated that very, very well, and I applaud him. I've been watching that system develop down there. In fact, he was kind enough to have me come down there for the inaugural event in Pearl River County when they instituted that system. And I said then, this may be a template for the rest of the state. I hope that it is, because he's got a good system down there, yet his system is not able to take care of his whole district. He's got 2 big counties and 3 poor counties. There are more poor counties than anything else in our state. And so I implore you to bring this matter into the legislature during the coming session and do what we need to have done. The state system is very much out of balance. The prosecutors, I applaud them. I've been one of them. I've been there. I understand that. They need everything they're getting and probably more. But the defense is another story. The playing field is far from level. You are the great levelers, and I call upon you to do what you can to make things as they should be. Mr. Chairman, I don't know much, but if you have a question, I'll be glad to try to answer it.
Yes, sir. You're familiar with this new rule that the Supreme Court has formulated or asked us to follow that allows us or requires us to take someone from their arrested all the way through the process. My experience is that is even after the rule was passed is not happening. Like I said earlier, I'm the public defender for Tishomingo County. I don't get my client until indictment. Senator Sparks is the misdemeanor public defender, so he will get them when they're arrested. But once they're indicted, he leads them. I think that based on my experience, that there are wide swaths all over Mississippi where that rule is not being followed. I just think that I think it's well intended. I think it needs to be followed to some extent, and even enhanced and having some oversight on it. I guess my question to you, long-winded, is the Supreme Court aware that it's basically not practical for private attorneys to follow that rule?
Yes, sir. I'm going to give you a long answer to a very reasonable and short question. It was my privilege when I got on the Supreme Court in 2009 for Chief Justice Waller to appoint me to the Criminal Rules Committee, and I've been on it ever since. My dear friend, Justice Ann Lamar, who is retired from the court now, but Justice Lamar was the chair of that committee. And there had been a study committee that had existed for about 7 or 8 years before that, made up of judges, lawyers, law professors that had recommended new criminal rules. We never had a compact set of criminal rules as we did civil rules and rules of evidence and such as that. So we set out on that task, and it was a years-long process. Now, I agree with Mr. DeGree that the recent change to Rule 7 of the Rules of Criminal Procedure was really a clarification. I will say that when the U.S. Supreme Court decided Gideon, it mandated that the states provide public defense for indigent people. It did not tell the states how to fund that. The Mississippi Supreme Court was in much the same position in promulgating criminal rules and providing for representation of indigent defendants. We could not tell the counties or anyone, cities or anybody else, how to fund that. We told them what needed to be done. So the clarification was to underscore and emphasize one concept, and that was continuity of representation. We provided in the criminal rules that a defendant can get a preliminary hearing in a felony case, even though he or she may be out on bail or whatever the circumstances, if they make a timely request for it. We also decreed that every arrestee have an encounter with a judge within 48 hours of being arrested. So they get an appointment of counsel at that initial appearance if the judge believes they are indigent. And the goal of the court was, in recognition of this so-called dead zone, to try to keep a lawyer in contact with that defendant from A to Z. In other words, from the time that they have that initial appearance until they get to circuit court and have been indicted. Previously, they didn't get a lawyer there during that dead zone because the justice court or the municipal court, which might have appointed a lawyer, has lost jurisdiction of it during that time, while it has if a felony been referred or bound over to the grand jury. So we tried to close that up. How the counties fund that is up to them. The rules also provide that the counties need to come up with a plan. The justice courts, the circuit courts, the supervisors, all of them need to collaborate because the Supreme Court recognized the very thing Judge Harrell was talking about, and that is the disparity of prosperity. I'm not trying to coin a phrase, but there is a disparity of prosperity among our counties. We know that Issaquena County has quite a different situation from DeSoto County in terms of their ability to fund things. And so there is one district in the state, and I'm proud to live in it, one circuit court district in the state that has come up with local rules to implement Rule 7.2, and that has just recently occurred. Judge Irving went to work on that and got that done in Copiah, Jefferson, and Claiborne counties. That needs to be done all over the state. So we understand there's a problem, and in further answer to your question, you know, we know anecdotally there's a problem out there. But when we promulgate a rule, it is not for us to go out and investigate whether that rule is being complied with. We have to have a justiciable issue before the court before we can do anything of that nature. If there are places where judges are ignoring that, then I would say they may be subject to judicial performance complaints. We're not going to make those complaints as a court. We're going to deal with them as they come to us.
I alluded earlier that in my district and a lot of them around, there seems to be a problem with the gateway of defining who is an indigent client. And a lot of people are being defined as indigent that may not be. Is there any oversight provided by the Supreme Court in that manner?
No, sir.
You mentioned that the district attorneys are a state constitutional office. I had an old lawyer tell me one time that the Constitution provides for only, the federal Constitution provides only for a public defender to be present. My position is it's a constitutional requirement, and I believe that we as a state are pushing the limits of our federal Constitution and not providing public defenders what they need. And I'm asking you, do you believe, I know you sat on the task force, you've been doing this for more than 20 years, and do you believe that a public defender system in Mississippi will make our judiciary better?
I believe it will make the quality of justice better in our state, and in the process, our judiciary as well.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Justice Kitchens?
Al Sage, don't you put your hand up. He was scratching his ear, I think.
We don't listen to what he says anyways. Justice Kitchens, you've been a friend to me, and I thank you for that, and I thank you for your testimony here today, and I appreciate all that you've done for Mississippi throughout your career.
You're very gracious, sir, and I hope I'm not through.
All right, next I'm going to go to Spencer Cash. Spencer is the president of Magnolia Defenders at the University of Mississippi. Spencer, you're recognized.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman. As he said, I'm Spencer Cash. I'm a third-year law student at the University of Mississippi. I'm glad to be here. I'm originally from Hickory, Mississippi. I think Representative is familiar with that as well. Representative Hurst, excuse me. So thank you so much for the invite. I'm here to provide a student perspective. As he said, I'm part of the Magnolia Defenders, which is a student group that is interested in public defending in the state of Mississippi and outward. But I want to start off with a quote from a Kentucky public defender who's a 2021 UM grad, who said, "I was persistently disappointed in the lack of public defender jobs throughout the state." She's from South Mississippi, and she's currently recruiting students from the university to go work in Kentucky. In fact, 2 have taken her up on that job. Now they've taken offers, and there are other third-year students who have been offered to work in Kentucky. But Kentucky's not the only state that's taking Mississippi students away to do public defense work. We're losing students to Memphis, and throughout Tennessee, all throughout Georgia, Florida, New York, Alabama, California, you name it. I mean, Mississippi students have gone to do public defending elsewhere. And there are several students currently, like the Kentucky public defender, that are persistently disappointed in the options present in the state. The reality is when we graduate, we likely won't have a full-time public defender job in the state of Mississippi. There could be a lot of reasons for that. I mean, some of it could be the hiring cycle. We take the bar in July. We won't know until October, and so there's like a really small gap of time. And a lot of time those full-time public defenders don't leave their jobs, which continuity is a good thing. But for us looking, that is a barrier to us. And, there also, there have been openings in Jackson, and for me specifically, that's a little more complicated for me. I've got a wife and a 4-year-old, and if I were to pursue what I really want to do is full-time public defense, I'm going to have to uproot my child, and my wife too, from really the only community that she's known, from her friends, from her school. So I'm almost have to choose between this professional feeling that I have and this personal life thing too. I shouldn't have to sacrifice that. But Magnolia Defenders was formed a couple of years ago to kind of address this type of frustration, this disappointment. And in fact, the 2 founders of Magnolia Defenders are both full-time public defenders outside of Mississippi now. But we want to do this. It is an ideal that a lot of us share, but it's also a fundamental right, as has been discussed already. And as much of a right as it is to bear arms, be free from illegal searches and seizures. And so we have a lot of students that are interested in this. We run about 25 to 30 members. And there are other students that are outside the organization that are interested. So on a micro level, there are students in the Magnolia Defenders who are disappointed, but hopeful, because I'm here today, and I think that's a really, really nice thing. But what Magnolia Defenders has essentially turned into is it's turned into a place for us to commiserate, for one thing, but also it's turned into us being able to network with out-of-state public defense services. So we have really close connections to the Memphis office, Birmingham, Atlanta, and elsewhere, and we're able to get our students jobs as public defenders elsewhere, and that's kind of what Magnolia Defenders has turned into. But that's just really on a micro level, but it's kind of representative of a macro level issue that got us here. I did some other things before law school. I was a 7th grade English teacher in Newton, Mississippi for a little bit, and it was part of what then was known as the Critical Needs Scholarship. It's essentially Teach for America. Mississippi had a scholarship available, and I took them up on that. It was a loan forgiveness program. And one of the things that we had to teach our students was, author's purpose, author's theme, and how do you figure that out? And it's not always obvious what the author's trying to tell you. And so, of course, it was frustrating for them. It was frustrating for me sometimes, too, to figure out, how do I teach them this concept? And so what we had to do is we had to teach them that there are ways that you can look and figure out what the author's trying to say. Like maybe they used a picture. Why did they italicize this word? What type of adjectives are they using to kind of get their point across? And eventually they were able to figure out what the author's purpose was. And so if you take that framework and you move it to the Mississippi system as it stands now, Mississippi hasn't just flat out said we don't want a full-time system. They haven't said that. But if we look outside and we look to the context clues, there's no state oversight commission. There's no statewide system. There's a multi-million-dollar discrepancy in what the district attorney's office is paid versus what a public defender's office is paid. And then just on a micro level, how much difference there is in a public defender and an ADA being paid. So those four things together, if you look, it's logical to assume that public defense is just less valuable in the state's eyes. We don't believe that it's a less valuable thing. We think it's a very important work. But it's literally less valuable because of the amount of funding that the state has been able to put in it. And it's also less valuable because there hasn't been time and effort from the state level to be able to say, like, hey, look, this is important to us. And there have been movements, but both on a macro level and a micro level, this is kind of where we are. But I love Mississippi. I'm from here. I plan on being here. I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I'm working for an attorney now in Oxford as part of the CJA panel. I'm doing some federal defender work with him. And so Magnolia Defenders is grateful and thankful to be seen and heard. And there's been some question about, like, you know, what do we do? What about the private attorneys and things? Like, we're here. Like, we want to do it, and we're leaving. And there's students here now that could alleviate some of that pressure. So if you build it, we will come. We're here, and people will come, because right now we're leaving. Thank you, Chairman. I can take any questions.
Spencer, you heard, there's been quite a bit of testimony about this, the disparity between ADA or DAs and public defenders. We're aware of that. You heard, I think, with David Carroll talking about some public defenders are elected in different states. And one of them, I think he gave the example, ran on a tough on crime platform. My experience is, how do you change, based on what you've learned and your experience, how do you change? Because that's the policy. Everybody you're looking at around this table are policy makers. And that tough on crime mindset is often what we have to run on. So how do you change that messaging that the public defender and the need for the protection of the Sixth Amendment is just as important as the protection of the Second Amendment?
Yeah, I think one thing that gets lost sometimes is accountability. Public defenders aren't saying these people shouldn't be held accountable, so there is still this sense of accountability that public defenders are there to help make sure happens. So I think having a conversation around that, I think, is important. Crime is not something that we're okay with, I guess, is essentially what I'm getting at. How to change the messaging. I mean, I think that Justice Kitchens alluded to this a little bit. It took a lot of time to change the messaging from the district attorneys growing into what they are, and I think it's just going to take some time to do the same. And I was unfamiliar with that history until he spoke, but I think it's going to be something similar to that.
All right. Any other questions for Spencer? Anybody? The gentleman from DeSoto.
Spencer, thanks for being here. One question that I have for you, specifically when you talk about graduates, 3Ls, potential graduates going into the legal field. I chose to be a prosecutor because there was no private counterpart to it, right? You can only be a prosecutor and work for the state. But when you look at PD work, it's akin to criminal defense. What do you see as the big discernment between a graduate looking to be specifically a public defender as opposed to just joining the criminal defense bar?
Well, I think there is some overlap between some of the public defenders and criminal defense work. I know one of my professors now, Jacinta Hall, is both a public defender and a full-time criminal defense attorney, and she's in DeSoto County. So I think maybe it comes down to money. I mean, I'm sure that there's just some truth in that. There's more money to be made there, but we're not all bleeding hearts, I guess, is another thing too. I mean, I think it's just a fundamental right. I mean, we do believe in it, but it is the right thing to do, but I think money might have something to do with it.
All right. Any further questions for Mr. Cash? Lady from Madison, you've been awful quiet. Are you sick? Spencer, thank you. Keep up the good work. We appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thank you.
She, she did say that she was getting hungry. So, and she said, and you don't want to see Jill Ford hungry. Next, Ms. Lowry, if you would, take the mic and provide us with your testimony. You are recognized when you are ready.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman and members of this committee, for inviting me here today. When I was appointed full-time public defender in Hinds County, I began work February 3rd of 2020. Before I could sit in my chair at my new office, there was a letter of resignation in my chair from one of the main litigators in the public defender's office explaining that he was taking another job for financial reasons. He explained and did this beautiful dissertation on how Hinds County, because I'm here to speak on Hinds County, needed to do a better job with paying public defenders. He was young, with a young family, and he needed to make more money. Had been in that office for over 5 years. His effective date of resignation was March 1st, 2020. I wish I could tell you that that was the only letter of resignation that I've received, as I've sat in that office for 4 years. Immediately thereafter, with 11 attorney positions, I had 10 attorneys to resign. 10 out of 11. Most of the reasons given were financial in nature. Just recently, my last letter of resignation came August 15th of 2023. The most experienced trial attorney in the office came in and said, "Gail, it's all about the money." She went to the district attorney's office of Hinds County and made $35,000 more than what I was able to pay her. I wish I could tell you that's the only one of those 10 resignations where someone left our office historically and went to the DA's office, which is a block up the street. So you have the same attorney, and this happened literally a few years ago, who clocked out, so to speak, at 5 p.m. on a Friday and walked into the DA's office of Hinds County, and at that time, he was able to make $28,000 increase than what he could make in our office. Recognizing this crisis, the senior judge, Tommy Green, who is now retired, basically issued a state of emergency when I lost those 10 attorneys. There was at that time flowing ARPA money, temporary, a Band-Aid for a massive bleed. You'll see on the handout that I had zero resignations when there was an incentive stabilization program put in Hinds County to address the salary problem that I was having. That order of the court and that program implemented by the Board of Supervisors of Hinds County ran out June 30th. I had a young attorney, sharp, sitting in my office at least by July 15th saying, "Gail, I don't want to leave, but I can't pay my bills. I've got school loans." And the American Bar Association has said that there should be parity with the district attorney's office because they're on one side, we're on the other side. Where I find myself in Hinds County is that you can go to Forest County and make more money than you can in Hinds County. Public Defender's Office. What you have before you is a graphic of where I am, what we're dealing with, and the reality, and that's why I am so happy to be here today, because to get the story out, this body did increase by 3 positions, state-funded attorneys in the Public Defender's Office this past session. However, this body and nobody else funded a secretary, social worker, investigators, no mention of office space, supplies, furniture. So if this is an opportunity for a complete picture to be painted, I want to make sure that it is. I scribbled some numbers together. Of course, you will, they can be verified because my math may be wrong, but it's in the general vicinity of what would be necessary just for my office to keep up with what the legislature is doing as it concerns the district attorney's offices. Even with those 3 additional positions, when you increase positions for the DAs and you do not do that or fund that on the public defense side, we suffer, we're crippled. And just to give you an idea of what we do, within 48 hours in Hinds County, as I hear all the discussions on the rule clarifications, we have always represented our clients and been appointed in the municipal courts. I have attorneys in municipal court of the city of Jackson every day, Monday through Friday. We provide that continuous representation. We have been there from the initial appearance to the prelim. Usually by prelim time, that's when we may see a district attorney, an assistant district attorney, but they are nowhere working when we get started. I want to say this. When you have attorneys who are passionate about what they do and they are good at what they do, and there is an opportunity for there to be a shoring up to make sure that a constitutional right is righted, is guaranteed, is given, we as public defenders take that extremely seriously. Right now, to speak on retention, I have 3 openings. When the state-funded positions were advertised, I got 8 applicants for 3 positions. My remaining county positions where there is no, as you can see where I'm asking for enhancement from the legislature to help the county to at least put us on a level playing field, I've had 3 applicants hoping to hire one. One appeared in a golf shirt in a very casual atmosphere to say, I just came to the interview to let you know I'm going with the Attorney General's office because they were able to pay me over $90,000. My starting pay in Hinds County is $64,000. So I struggle with over 4,000 cases in that, as I said before, we're appointed at initial appearance. A lot of those cases, there have not been indictments, but we still take the phone calls and visit those persons who are incarcerated in the Raymond Detention Center. Year to date, there have been over 900 new cases. we are struggling to close cases because what the Hinds County 4 elected judges did, they signed in July a document, an official statement of support for the Public Defender's Office, trying to make the county Board of Supervisors aware that when I don't have a public defender, that affects my caseload. My docket is affected because any given attorney may have 150 cases. When I get that resignation, that's 150 clients who just lost their lawyer. So we are scrambling, trying to make sure that somebody that needs to be in Raymond, that needs representation, that we are on that with limited staff, because retention, recruitment is an uphill battle. So I thank you for this opportunity to speak, and I am available for questions. And if I don't know the answers, I'll find them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Lowry, are you funded completely by Hinds County?
Except for the 3 state-funded positions that came in the last session, yes, sir.
And I know the answer to this, I guess, but the city of Jackson doesn't provide you anything?
No, sir. We're the Hinds County Public.
I understand. I didn't know if they would throw in anything or not. How much is your budget? I see here 832,000, or is that what you're requesting? Your budget's 648,000?
Oh, no, sir. That just deals with personnel.
So what is your budget on an annual basis?
Was approved this year for about $2.3 million.
And you're the largest, and really the only, I guess, but the largest public defender office in the state.
Yes.
And that's 2.5 million?
2.4 million, but that was not my request. My request was to attain parity.
Sure.
With the district attorney's office, but that is all that was received, which basically is level funding. No raises despite requests.
How many lawyers do you have?
Right now, 14, counting the 3 that are state funded.
How many
attorneys?
I'm sorry, how many cases do you have? How many clients?
Over 4,000 cases, and there is a question as to whether or not that's charges versus people. And so the way our system captures it, it's over 4,000 cases.
And you get your client when? At what time? What part of the process?
Within 48 hours of arrest, my attorneys are available in court to be recognized after an indigency affidavit has been signed. We are then appointed, and we continue through disposition of the case.
Do you do something, as Mr. Coletti pointed out, having different lawyers handle, so say, preliminary hearings, bond hearings?
My office is divided into 2 divisions. I have a not indicted division, and then the circuit court division, which handles the felony cases in circuit court.
Okay, all right. Any other questions from, let me while I process anything, any other questions from members of the committee? Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Chairman. I stated earlier that I do PD work in rural areas, but I'm not familiar with caseloads with what you have to deal with. And I mean, I'm kind of familiar with it. And the few cases that we have that we feel overburdened by, a few cases, I can only imagine what you have to deal with. Could you tell us, what is that doing? How is that affecting the whole? I think what they need to know, because there are some people who are not attorneys in here, do that type of work. They need to know how is that negatively affecting the criminal justice system as a whole and society as a whole, if you can sum it all up.
Well, there are a whole lot of parts to what you just said, so I'm going to try to simplify it. Because of the work ethic of the people who are there, we see clients daily. When there is a caseload and you have on your caseload as an attorney assigned to, like Mr. Coletti talked about, Judge Wooten's office, court, and you have 150 cases, you basically live at the detention center because judges require that you meet with the client, you talk to the client, you prepare for that case. So when a docket is called, it's not introducing you to the client. That's trouble, if that's your first time seeing that person. Part of what is not budgeted is we have 2 cars for 14 attorneys. My attorneys drive their own cars to Raymond in order to keep up with trying to see those cases, those clients. Of course, on any trial docket, you won't have all 150 cases set for trial. But you will have, I think Mr. Coletti gave the name Andrew Williams. That's one of my deputies. He is down for a trial in probably about 15 cases on any given day when there's a trial called to be. So with that, you are shuffling and trying to do the best you can to keep up, and then it does not help that those courtrooms aren't fully staffed because I have 3 openings, which means everybody's doing double time just to keep up. So with quality of representation, we had a trial this week that ended yesterday. Those attorneys put in the work to make sure that that trial, I was extremely proud. Did we win the case? No. But that client received quality representation for their day in court, which is ultimately what we need to do. So overall, when I get 4 circuit court judges making the people with the purse, with the money, aware that you are when you don't fund public defense, you are adversely affecting how these cases can go through the system. But for my office, I have to brag on them because we try to make sure that even if you're playing double time covering 2 courtrooms, that we get that done so that we're not always filing motions for continuances, which means that somebody who may be innocent because they are presumed to be that way by our system of justice will get their day in court as soon as possible. So it's a juggling act.
Ms. Lowry, how are you appointed?
I was appointed by the senior judge of Hinds County.
All right. You had talked about 4,000 cases, and there'd been some evidence or testimony provided about private bar. Does Hinds County, do you use any private attorneys that when you may have a conflict? I don't know. Does that come into play with you?
I don't use them, but the judge will, if we recognize a conflict, the judge making the appointment will then appoint private counsel if
Gotcha.
our office has a conflict.
Okay. All right.
So that's out of our purview.
Okay, but it is done here in Hinds County.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Lowry? Ms. Lowry, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go to, we got 2 more. I'm going to go to Paloma Wu. Paloma, if you would, come on. You've testified with us a couple times before, and you're always welcome. Just when you get to the mic, you're recognized to begin speaking. I'm about to freeze. Y'all cold? I'm about to freeze.
Good morning.
Morning.
Or,
yeah.
Thank you, Chairman Bain and members, for the opportunity to address this committee. I'm Paloma Wu, Deputy Director of Impact Litigation at the Mississippi Center for Justice. There, Rob McDuff and Blake Feldman and I make up a small litigation team at MCJ, which otherwise primarily provides free, direct legal services to low-income Mississippians across the state. So I defer to the expertise of the venerable 2018 Public Defense Task Force report authors and Office of the State Public Defender, which have taken their legislative mandate very seriously. The Public Defender Task Force report is exhaustive in scope and ultimately proposes a hybrid approach, state-local, that centers on compromise and incrementalism to achieve the main goal of passage. Nevertheless, it has never passed, and neither have the increasingly watered-down versions of it which have been introduced every year since. In our view, one of the main hurdles to arriving at a solution for what everyone agrees is a crisis is the degree of local versus state responsibility or control built into any approach. So in these comments, I will respectfully propose potential ways to either reframe or bypass certain thorny local versus state control issues. And I'll use pay and staffing parity between prosecutors and public defenders, as Defender Gail Lowry just described, as my main example throughout. So, as we know, the Constitution requires that the state provide public defense to people who are facing incarceration and are indigent. They can delegate that responsibility to the counties, but it must be a constitutional delegation, meaning it must be with adequate resources and the ability to monitor and verify. So trust and verify if you delegate, and fund. If you were creating the machine of a public defense system, what are the main parts that everybody agrees constitute a public indigent defense delivery system? We think they boil down to 6 basic questions that any one of us, if we were accused of a crime, facing incarceration and couldn't afford an attorney, it might help to just imagine yourself there or somebody that you love there, charged with a crime, facing incarceration, can't afford an attorney. We think you'd have 6 questions. Will I be given a lawyer if I can't pay for one? Is my lawyer qualified to take my case? Is my lawyer paid enough to keep working on my case as much as the prosecutor's office will, so I have a fair fight? Will my lawyer have help investigating my case? Is this my lawyer, or do they work for the judge? Is this my lawyer, or do they work for one of the other defendants in the case? So we think that if you can put yourself in the mindset of the person facing incarceration charged without the ability to pay, we can walk pretty easily through some of the main points that both the task force and the Sixth Amendment Center covered, that if the legislature is able to confront either systemically or by targeting some of the most important subparts, then potentially we could make progress, even if there's continues to be extraordinary disagreement regarding state versus local control issues. Before we get started, and I have tables for every one of the questions to talk about who sets the standard, who monitors, who evaluates, who carries out the duty, and who pays for it. Before we get started, I just want to briefly address one issue that's often cast as a local versus state control issue that we believe is a false flag on that front. So in the spirit of candor to this body, and only in that spirit, I feel obligated to name that many people believe that indigent defense reform in Mississippi has gone nowhere because a subgroup of highly motivated private practice attorneys who hold flat fee public defense contracts want to ensure continued private attorney access to public defense funding streams. And while modifying funding streams prevents a thorny political problem, We think it's irrelevant. It's an irrelevant answer to the policy question of how to keep indigent defense delivery local if indeed the overarching policy priority is local control, separate and apart from ensuring continued private attorney access to public defense related income. And to do that, throughout, I'll give examples of hyper-local control models. Not because we think that those are the best practices, but in order to help us shake off the association of local control with private attorney access to public defender related income on the flat fee part-time contracts. So we know that, the overwhelming majority of Mississippi's 82 counties use the flat fee part-time public defender contracts to pay for all their indigent defense needs annually through payment of one sum to a private attorney. Many of these attorneys are excellent and have taught me many things that I was not trained to do and who have helped me very much. So many of these private attorneys are, I think Chairman Baines said they're doing God's work and they're extremely talented. However, there is some baked-in conflicts in the flat fee model, which a lot of people have already pointed out, which is that contract holders don't bill by the case, by the hour, by outcome. They get paid, for example, $25,000 a year, regardless of time spent or not spent on each case, or on all cases combined. So regardless of whether you spend 10 hours or 10 minutes per case, and regardless of whether you ultimately take on 500 clients or 5,000 clients, the $25,000 is already allocated to you. So we raise the interests of this relatively small group of contractors in order to note that in their interest, if we implement complete pay and staffing parity of the kind that Defender Gail Lowry outlined, parity with the DA's offices, it would not mean wiping out all part-time public defense funding streams that currently flow to private attorneys. We would still always need some private attorneys to take on public defense because of the requirement for conflict counsel in the event that you have a full-time public defender. So that's one issue. The other, I'll just move on to the questions. The first questions you would ask if you were in that situation, will I get a lawyer if I can't pay for one? I'll just say, who set the standards in the current, the standards in the current system? It's the Supreme Court via Mississippi Rule of Criminal Procedure 7 that tells us what people are entitled to indigent defense, but as many people have pointed out, it's a very squishy standard. Who monitors the appointments are happening when they should? Nobody. Who enforces the standard? Nobody. Who performs the duty of applying it, single county by county, and who funds the duty county by county? The 2018 task force report suggested that the entity that would set the standards would be the Public Defense Oversight Council. Just to remind folks, if it's been a while since they read the task force report, the Public Defender Oversight Council had the authority, was to have the authority to promulgate standards, evaluate performance, report findings. 3 members appointed by the Mississippi Association of Supervisors, 2 members appointed by the Lieutenant Governor, 2 by the Speakers of the House of Representatives, 2 by the Chief Justice. So that was to be the state-level Public Defender Oversight Council. They were also supposed to monitor compliance along with the district public defenders. So that system created district public defenders who would be appointed by the Office of the State Public Defender, subject to nomination by boards, 3-person boards who consisted of people within the county. So that was the 2018 Public Defense Task Force, and then funding came from a pro rata share of costs within each district, contributed by each county, and then the state legislature was to contribute some. So that's the 2018 Task Force response to will I get a lawyer if I can't pay? The HB 840, which on Andre was here and giving us details about. I'm sure you guys got it from him, but I'll just say his proposal is that the Office of the State Public Defender propose standards for appointment to the Mississippi Supreme Court, who will then promulgate them through their regular rulemaking proceedings. I will just say, as an alternative approach, for example, Montana is mentioned often in the report. They have a unified state system. It's a state commission. They appoint the public defenders, they create the standards, and then they enforce the standards. So they have the ability to punish, I suppose, and control. So there are fully vertical systems, and the 2018 task force is truly hybrid. And right now we don't have anything. Question 2, is my lawyer qualified to take this case? So who currently sets standards to ensure attorney qualifications and experience for case type? Mississippi, nobody, except an appellate counsel in death penalty cases. Otherwise, no standards for whether certain attorneys are qualified. Nobody monitors or enforces. Nobody performs the duty of ensuring qualification, and there's no funding associated. The 2018 task force would have delegated the standard-setting duty to this Public Defender Oversight Council, and the I shouldn't call it Andres, the Office of State Public Defenders 2023 proposed bill would allow him to promulgate standards through the court. Who monitors and enforces now, currently? Nobody. Who performs the duty of ensuring qualified indigent defense? Nobody. Who funds it? Nobody. And the alternative approaches, for example, Michigan has a hybrid approach. A state commission sets the standards, hires a state public defender who then helps the counties meet standards. So it's not so much enforcement as assistance. So number 3, the question, you're sitting there. Is my lawyer paid enough to keep working on my case and to keep working as much as the prosecutor can work so that it's a fair fight? Currently in Mississippi, who sets the standards for a public defender? Pay parity. Nobody. Who monitors them? Nobody. Enforces them? Nobody. Performs them? Nobody. Funds them? Nobody. The 2018 task force suggested that the PD Oversight Council set standards for PD pay, and that the funding come through a mixed single county, multi-county, or state entity approach, including through grant funding that the states could secure. So they had a highly mixed model for funding. The 2023 Office of the State Public Defender bill asked for, and I'll just say up front, we think it's far too little money. So they asked for a maximum of $2 million. So to put that into context, our expert from the Sixth Amendment Center said that he thought getting our indigent public defense system up to par would be about $23 million. The example that Mississippi is often compared to is Arkansas, a very similar population. They established in 1993 a state-level commission overseeing all indigent defense. Their budget in Arkansas is $24 million. So very similar to what the Sixth Amendment Center thinks it's going to cost. Now, we've heard an extraordinarily compelling testimony from Ms. Lowry why pay parity is so important. So if we're trying to, litmus test, 23 million, Sixth Amendment Center, 24 million from Arkansas, what does Mississippi spend on all of its felony prosecutorial costs? It's 25 million. So we all seem to be slotting up on this 23, 24, 25 million zone. So I really like Andre. $2 million is not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. I'll just say that the OSPD model suggests that we should have a southern and a northern and a Hinds County proposed projects to fund fully staffed kind of public defender offices, and the funding structure would be to keep included counties at their current expenditures, which I think that you asked about, and then the rest Office of the State Public Defender would grant to achieve parity with the DA's offices. One thing, next thought experiment I think is helpful is, can you imagine a private attorney with an unlimited number of paying private clients taking on via a flat fee contract the prosecution of all felony cases in a county for 1 year without any assistants, investigators, or administrative staff? I suppose that's like Justice Kitchens was trying to describe to us. But the reason why pay parity in defender allowed situation is easier to understand. It's a one county, one district system, right? So one district, you just transfer the same amount over to the county. It gets a little more complicated in multi-county districts, and then I think that's where people get really gummed up into local or state control questions. Well, if we fund, then who's going to be in charge? We don't recommend this, but just as a thought experiment, we think it's possible to do pay parity on an opt-in county-by-county basis by matching, potentially, we don't recommend this, right? We recommended the 2018 task force report, but we give an example of how it can work just to show that local control does not mean part-time flat fee public defender contracts. It can mean something else. For example, if the Second Circuit, which is composed of Harrison, Stone, and Hancock, the Second Circuit, the DA's office is funded by the state at a level of 1 district attorney, 10 assistants, 4 other investigators or staff. And let's say only Harrison County wants to opt in. Then the first opt-in releases the full-time public defender. And then the rest of those 10 assistant positions and additional investigators or paralegals will be released to Harrison County at a pro rata share of the district. So maybe if they're 50% of the second district, they get the full-time public defender, and then they get 5 of the 10 ADAs and 2 of the support positions. And then if Stone County, let's just say they're 30% pro rata. Say pro rata however you want, proportionality. The number of felony cases, the number of people at the last census, however you can do it. But the proportional amount, Stone County says, hey, we want in. Now that 1 full-time public defender is now shared between the 2 counties, and then the releases the funding for the 20%, or the 30%, whatever Stone County is, of that district pot. And if only Stone and Harrison want in on the full-time system, they're going to share a public defender, and they're going to have 8. If it's 50 and 30, or 15, 27 or 8 assistants, they're going to have an investigator, a paralegal between the 2 counties, where before they only had a contractor, and then Hancock doesn't want to do this. They're really like their current model. They don't have to do it. Just do you. But for other counties that want to do it by themselves, but if they're in the same district and another county comes up, they could join up on an agreement. So I think it's possible to do what we think is maybe, I love standards, I love monitoring, I love enforcement, but the most important thing here is pay, let's be honest, okay? Pay people for their work. We can do the rest later. You've got to pay people. You're looking meaningfully at me. Should I stop? Okay. But so that's just an example of why local control is not related to the contract model. Number 4, will my lawyer have help investigating my case? This is the same as what I was just saying. Currently, we have no PD staffing parity. Nobody monitors, enforces. If a single county wants to pay for an investigator, that is 100% on that single county to come up with that money. The 2018 task force approach would have created the PD Oversight Council over staffing parity issues, and it would have been funded through the mixed single county, multi-county, or state entity funding. The HB 840. HB 840, which is the OSPD's proposed program, it may provide standards for PD staffing, but it's very unclear whether there'll be any monitoring or enforcement. Question number 5, is this my lawyer, or does this lawyer for the judge? This has been raised, particularly during the Sixth Amendment Center's testimony, but currently there are no standards for public defender independence. Nobody monitors it, enforces it, performs it. It's actually baked into our current system, is non-independence. How do other people do this? There's a Michigan hybrid approach where there's a state commission sets the standards, hires the state defender, who then distributes state funds to help people meet state standards through the management of through the oversight of regional managers. So this is a sort of a little bit like what the task force came up with, which is, the PD Oversight Committee would create the standards, and it would be monitored by the these district public defenders. The difference, being, a lot of this state local control stuff is, if you're talking about that middle layer, whether the district level, if you're talking about the little matter, it's this we're getting stuck, right? We're pinned between, is that a top-down thing or is that a bottom-up thing? And there's been a lot of work by the task force trying to give everybody a little bit of what they want, but we have not made any progress in this area, and we definitely need to. Question number 6, is this my lawyer, or do they work for another defendant in this case? Currently, we have professional rules of responsibility regarding conflict, but our systems do not, in most indigent defense delivery locations, do not incorporate conflicts checks, and there's no way for the state to monitor whether we're doing that. And the 2018 task force tried to fund, the entire system, including a conflicts council. It said that the non-capital conflicts council would be funded at the county level, and the capital would be funded by the public defense, the council.
Ms. Wu, as to those last 2 questions, how in a statewide system, you've heard David Carroll talk, you've heard other talk about different ways around the state of how these public defenders are employed, or how they get their jobs through appointment, election, whatever. How would you recommend the state do that?
So we deferred to the 2018 task force as being the standard. However, good players adjust. That hasn't passed. So I, defer to Mr. Carroll for, I'm sure he has a range of recommendations, but I would say that there's a gold standard, which did not pass, which is in order to break the dependence between the judge and the council, which creates a conflict, the entity at the most top-down model, there's a state public defender who is making decisions for hiring, even at these regional or local levels, right? You make, say, public defender might make sure that all of the qualifications are met for that position, and they might make those choices. You can get down to the more regional level and say that, a multi-county system, those people can make those decisions. But I would say if you're in a pinch and you really need to pass something, you can break that chain by, for example, you can 2 birds with 1 stone. We are lacking we're lacking, qualification standards, and then we need independent appointees. So even if it was something as simple as let the judge, who usually appoints counsel, let the judge write up the qualifications in the application. But then there should be a actual open application process where there's a job posting and it's posted on many platforms, and the applications come into either some civil service body or even the local government that ultimately issues the contract, but it cannot be the judge.
I understand. Anything else you have for us? Any other questions or from anyone?
No, that is all. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for what you do and for coming in years past as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to acknowledge Caleb is here, I believe. Oh, Caleb is one of our fine reporters in the state, and he did wonderful reporting for this.
He's done a series of them. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Last witness is going to be his first time testifying to this committee is Mr. Clay Edwards. Clay, if you would come up and you have seen enough to know, just go to the mic, and when you get there, you are recognized. I've asked Clay to come talk. He is a local radio host, but he deals with a lot of crime, or does kind of his, what he talks about a lot. He deals with a lot of people, a lot of citizens that we all represent call and talk to him, and I've asked him to provide us with basically a man on the street type testimony for us. So you're recognized.
Thank y'all for having me. I do appreciate it. A little levity here. If you had told my mother that I was going to be in the same room downtown with John Coletti and a Chief Justice, she would have said, "What has that boy done now?" So we can all change and evolve and grow. So I do appreciate the opportunity. I've been running through my mind what I would say at this, and after getting the opportunity to listen to the folks that I got to hear, and looking at the criminal justice system, I get called a lot of things, from alt-right to far-right to a lot of other things that I don't agree with. But one thing I do not necessarily agree with what I would consider a conservative thought process. I think there should be criminal justice reform in every aspect, and whether it's what's going on in the prisons here in Mississippi and around the country, to the public defender issue, to over-sentencing, to under-sentencing. I was a citizen in Jackson for 43 years. I'm 46 years old. I moved out about 3 years ago. I guess it was March of 21, after record-breaking years of homicide in Jackson. 120 homicides in 2020, 153 in 2021. It's been 502 homicides in Jackson, if you believe JPD and what they've told WLBT. And after last week, it going from 71 to 101 overnight, I don't know that I believe those numbers. But it's been 502 homicides since January 1st, 2020. The city that I grew up in is out of control. So I do want to thank y'all for what y'all have done here with the Capitol Police, with HB 1020, everybody that was for that, I do appreciate it. The citizens of Jackson, politics aside, appreciate the efforts. Unfortunately, the Capitol Police don't cover all of Jackson. They cover this area here. It's expanding, so that'll be good. My parents still to this day live right over off Forest Hill Road in what was Byram, now I call it South Jackson. And we never see police down there, from anywhere, from JPD, from Hinds County, from, dang sure not Capitol Police, because that's not their area. And we've seen the effects of what an out-of-control criminal justice system has on a city like Jackson. We've seen property values. I consider my inheritance, my family's home and land out there, it's basically worthless compared to what it was 5-10 years ago, especially 10 years ago before they got annexed by Jackson. Jackson's come out there, hasn't done anything. I don't mean to get on a Jackson rant, but that's my area. That's my area of specialty. And it's where I grew up. And I've seen what crime and a soft on criminal justice system does to an area like Jackson. I mean, obviously you all have too. I mean, you're down here, you helped help fund the Capitol Police, help with the HB 1020, which we fully supported. So I moved to Brandon, I said about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. And I've jokingly said I felt a bit like a political refugee that had to seek asylum outside of the city. And, and there's partly true. If you're worried about having to defend yourself, we're talking about a city, a county that prosecuted its own police officer in Anthony Fox and got him sitting there rotting away in a jail for a crime I believe he did not commit. If they'll do that to their very own police, what would they do to an outspoken citizen like me or anybody else that has to defend himself in his home, has to pick my life over a bad guy's life? I couldn't take those chances. I had to get me and my family out of there. And I believe that comes back to what we're sitting here discussing today. So, any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Edwards? How are your the vast majority of people, and I understand we're dealing with some demographics there and the people that call your show, but the vast majority of them, how do they feel about the criminal justice system in Mississippi?
Look, everybody that calls the show, I think race and politics aside, I have a huge social media presence too. And so I see a lot of different comments and stuff under those posts. People admit there's a problem that needs to be resolved. I can definitely understand the public defender issue y'all are talking about today. If I got arrested today for having, we'll say, using my example of why I moved, for having to defend myself in a murder trial. If I got arrested today, my mom would know that John Coletti was not my attorney because she would know I couldn't afford John Coletti. She would know I'd have to get a public defender. And hearing what I've heard today just solidifies exactly how I felt about that system. No offense to anybody that does it, God bless you. But to hear that we're losing the best and brightest because the county can't afford to pay them, it's extremely scary. And I think most people will agree with that. If I have to be defended, I want to know I'm getting the best defense within reason that the state can offer.
Any other questions for Mr. Edwards? All right. Clay, thank you. Thank you for waiting around. Thank you for coming and providing this testimony, and keep up the good fight, okay?
Yep, great. Thank y'all.
All right, if y'all will permit me a moment of personal privilege. I love Mississippi. I love our state. And I want you all, when you get a chance, to look around at our state, at every industry that you can think of, whether it be music, film, business, whatever, politics, science. There's somebody that's been at the top that was from Mississippi. And that's because we create incredible people. This state does. And for the last 4 years, I've had the opportunity to watch incredible people work. You guys have done incredible things that people said were unachievable, that people said would never be done, like our mental health bill. Some of that stuff became law, some of that stuff didn't, but we passed it without fear of what was going to happen. We passed it because we felt it was the right thing to do. So I want to say that this committee has done incredible things for the last 4 years, and though I know I have not been a perfect chairman, and though there are days where I have not been a very good chairman, all of you have made me better. You made me a better legislator. You made me a better person. And for that, I am forever grateful to each and every one of you. For those new ones that are sitting around the table here, this place that you're sitting in at times can be very, very sleazy. But at the same time, it can be very majestic. My challenge to each of you is make it majestic. Do not be afraid to make that transformational vote. The ones that change Mississippi, the ones that make Mississippi better. Because whether you believe it or not, one day somebody else will be sitting in your chair. whether you're here for 4 years, 12, or 30. That chair will one day be occupied by somebody else. And you'll lose a position, but you'll never lose your legacy. So do things that create that legacy. It has been my honor to serve as your chairman, and I ask you all, as you go forward in January, don't be a politician. Be a Mississippian. Ladies and gentlemen, Jud B is adjourned.
I want to take some pictures.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. I'm good with that one.
Good deal.